Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. At this time, I'll call into order the open session of this work session meeting of the AISD Board of Trustees on November 21st at 7:09 p.m. The board, we intend to make one of our scheduled meetings each month a work session. This meeting is a work session. It's common practice not to include open forum on any work session agenda items. All discussion items will not have action taken tonight. We do have one action item tonight. Everything else will be taken action in future meetings. I want to thank everyone for coming out with us this evening. We will start our meeting this evening with the opening ceremony. Please join Mr. Hibbs in leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I heard this said the other day, salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please be seated. And now, if you would, please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. If you haven't already, please silence your cell phones and all electronic devices to avoid interruptions. First item we have tonight is appointments. Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Hogg. I'd like to recommend that the board appoint the individual discussed in closed session for the assistant principal position at Ellis Elementary School.
A motion we accept. Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Hibbs, a second by Dr. Reich. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote. All trustees present, all trustees voting in the affirmative. Dr. Cavazos? Applause is always a good thing. Dr. Cavazos,
Thank you,
please
President Hogg.
introduce.
At this time, I'd like to introduce Mr. Antonio Hunter as the assistant principal for Ellis Elementary. Antonio? Antonio received his computer science bachelor's degree from North Carolina A&T State University, and he received his Master of Education in Ed Administration from Concordia University. Antonio most recently is a special ed teacher in Dallas ISD and has served in that capacity at two different schools. Antonio, congratulations, and anybody you'd like to introduce, anything you'd like to say?
Yes, sir. President Hogg and to the board members and Dr. Cavazos, I just want to say thank you all for this opportunity. I am very excited to become a part of the Arlington Independent School District. This is truly a blessing and a great opportunity. I am looking forward to working with all the students, the staff, the parents, and the entire community at Ellis. I want to thank Dr. Kathy Link for believing in me and giving me this opportunity. Thank you very much. And I also have some surprise guests this evening from Ellis. I want to thank you all for coming out this evening. Thank you very much. I really, really appreciate it. And I have with me my lovely and beautiful wife, Tony, my wife of 17 years, who just supports me in everything that I do. She's my biggest cheerleader, my biggest fan, and always encourages me. And I just want to say thank you very much, and I love you. Thank you. And thank you, board, again.
Good job. Congratulations, Antonio. As is our custom, if you would please follow Mr. Hill out. We'd like to do a short reception. Please, the board would follow and allow the board to go first. We will reconvene at approximately 7:20-ish, right around there. Thank you. By Ms. Solons, a second by Ms. Pena. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote. Mr. Pompa, the motion is take action on final terminate contract of employee Virginia Lott. Ms. Solons made the motion, and Ms. Payne seconded. Thank you. All trustees present, all trustees voting in the affirmative. Next, we'll move to discussion items. First we have is Dr. Cavazos with Capital Needs Steering Committee update. Just for our board's knowledge, we're going to go through this presentation. Dr. Cavazos, we're going to make this very open. If we have questions, let me know. If there's no one else waiting, just go ahead and start talking. We have some natural stops where we can have those interactions. Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Hogg. And like you mentioned, as we go through the presentation, we'll be providing a lot of information this evening, and we are prepared for a good dialogue of the options that have been developed and with the process of the steering committee. So at this time, Tracy, or Cindy, sorry. There we go. At this time, Cindy Powell will come up and
Yes,
give
I told Tracy I
introduction.
would introduce him.
Thank you, Cindy.
We do have with us this evening two of our consultants. We have Casey Morris from Jacobs Project Management. They've been doing the facility assessment for us, and then we have Tracy Richter from DeYoung Richter. They partner with Jacobs on this project, on this engagement, and DeYoung Richter's role in this is the community engagement piece, and they facilitate our Capital Needs Steering Committee's work. And so this evening, Tracy is going to visit with us and present information about the options that we have developed to this point to address specific facility needs. And we have had one discussion on these with our committee. There will be another one on Monday evening. And so we'd like the board's input on these options as we go through this process as well. So, Tracy.
Thank you, Cindy, President Hogg, Dr. Cavazos, members of the Board of Trustees. Thank you for having me here tonight. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. It's been a lot of work so far, and but if I could just make a quick comment on your citizens in this committee, just what an outstanding group of people that have a true commitment to just a better education in this city. And so it's been a real pleasure to work with the staff and your community so far, and I'm looking forward to continuing that. So tonight I'm going to go through the presentation of some of the options that we've developed to this point. And again, I think we need to reiterate that these are options. There's no recommendation out there. Again, nobody's decided on anything until we vet this out with the community and talk about these options out there. And certainly taking your input on this and sharing it with the steering committee to show how collaborative this is this is a key point in the planning process, and it's one of the more critical points because it really does show the commitment of everybody working together on this. And so, President Hogg, like you said, any time to stop, you just let me know. I'm glad to answer when I can, and Dr. Cavazos, when you can help me on things that I need, that would work.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you. So the options development process is really about taking all of the data that was collected by the Jacobs Group, looking at all the assessment data, all the adequacy data. But when we do planning in a district this large, obviously we have to break it down into smaller components. It's hard to take 70 some odd buildings and say, how do we put this all into one piece of paper? Because that's just not possible. So basically what we do is we take the planning areas that we've developed and we even break them into smaller components. And the reason for that is there's some real natural barriers, interstates, roads, rivers, ditches that happen and occur that, and there's some real needs in parts of your city that other parts of the city don't have. And so collectively in a plan to put together a district-wide vision and mission and then pay attention to the specific needs of buildings has to come together somehow. And this is how we think we do this. And so we take a look at, we had an options work session about 3 or 4 weeks ago now. And we talked about things like capacity, enrollment, the utilization, the condition, programs in the buildings. We actually started with the community results. That was a big part of what we started with. Taking a lot of questions and a big report and condensing it down to figure out what our rules were, is what it was. We didn't want to step outside the boundaries of what the community shared with us in that first community dialogue. And that was, again, a real key component to this, is that if we stay within those rules and we try to shape our options around those, we believe that starts to build the consensus for recommendations. So we took that and we started to look at, looking at high schools. And with 6 high schools and how much they share and the vision they share, we've decided to put these into one planning group. If you look across, the enrollment really does exceed the functional capacity, and we've talked several times that at a high school level especially, when you see on paper that a high school looks at 80, 85%, a high school is pretty full at that point.
you know, between scheduling of all the things you have to schedule and everything. So we believe that. And so when you start to see your high schools being at 90, 95, 98%, boy, they really feel crunched. And so have to figure out a way that, but there's not a need to really build a new 2,500 student station high school out there. And at the cost of high schools today, that's a pretty big commitment. And also talking about, you know, bridging the vision of future high school education. And, you know, when we talked earlier in the first dialogue, we talked about, you know, if your population is going to be 15,000, do you need 15,000 seats for high school students in the future with virtual learning and dual enrollment and doing all that? What do you have to do with education to do that? And so with the balance of, you know, improved and continuing improving on delivery of high school education, and then with a couple of alternatives to relieve some of the pressure out of those schools by pulling students out into other facilities, we developed some options around that. And so it's really taking a really 21st century world-class approach to how we plan high schools. And so as you start to look at the options here, and you have them on your sheets, and I'm going to kind of go to them here too and mark notes as we're going through them. But on the high schools, you know, some of the options that we looked at were, the first one was Seguin High School and adding a 16 classroom addition. And on paper, you might want to say, well, it's your most underutilized school. Why would you add classrooms to a school that's your most underutilized? Well, the first thing is that you start to put additions on your existing other high schools, they become enormous high schools. That feels like it's outside the comfort range of what Arlington wants to deliver. Second of all, that this is a great facility that has potential for addition, plus has potential to draw a program to it and have a program in there. And we talk about a magnet program and define it how you may, but no program's really been determined. But the analysis goes to, you know, what do students need? What would attract them to come to a building like Seguin and travel away from their neighborhood high school? And so there's a lot of discussion that has to happen on that yet. But we feel like this is a great opportunity to provide some school choice at a really, really fine high school such as Seguin. But there's also opportunities for a boundary change. And sometimes this isn't the easiest thing to do. But in a boundary change, a classroom addition would stay on the table at Seguin, but starting to look at a transition of maybe Bowie over to Seguin, and, you know, and again through a process that we would recommend. But even looking at kind of a domino of taking some Bowie down to Seguin and then Houston into Bowie. Again, I think that something I need to state here is that when we deliver a facility plan, and if we were to recommend a boundary change, we're not going to recommend that you change it from Main Street to Elm Street. We're going to recommend that there's a process to go through a boundary process that you guys do anyway, that involves your community. So these were seen as some ways to relieve some pressure at some really overcapacity schools. But the other things that talked programmatically were the idea of building a district fine arts center. Now, the Fine Arts Center, and even starting to look at some location, and these tie into some other options that you'll see in the junior high option, but you know, some sites have been identified, or things like the Workman site, but you know, there's a junior high there, so we'd have to think about what to do with Workman Junior High. And there's some other sites that could be available for this. You know, this is a building that would have classrooms. It would, you know, it would support the educational mission still, but have a focus on the fine arts. It's a building that helps you define world class, because that program is really about drilling all the way down to the elementary schools and then supporting something into this into a great high school delivery model that would actually probably deliver beyond high school. Its intention would be to, and so you don't see really a fine arts center can relieve some of those capacity issues, but what really can do that is something like a career and technical center. That is again a pull-out program that, you know, you can envision probably 2 half-day programs that service, you know, we looked at, you know, 25 to 3,000 students that would pull out of your high schools every day at some point, which obviously provides some relief there. And again, some of the options here were to be look at the Hutchinson site. What we found interesting is that when we used our GIS analysis, we did an actual center point of your enrollment, and so we did everything north, south, east, and west. And the center point of your enrollment is not too many blocks just south of Hutchinson, believe it or not, and which is which kind of looks weird because it looks a little east, but that's the center of your enrollment. And so it's on a main artery, good access, things like that. But again, there's a junior high sitting on that site, so it ties to another option. Or looking at other sites. Another high school option that we looked at was looking at a district-wide athletic complex that would service natatorium, competition wrestling, and competition gymnastics. But talking to the steering committee and listening to community members, it would go beyond just some competition for especially wrestling and gymnastics. Currently, you only have one school that has a real practice facility for gymnastics. And so, and I believe it's in an elementary building. And so this could serve as something for more flexibility for those sports right there. We haven't really identified kind of site needs here, but there's opportunity out there, and we know that. And part of the feedback we got from the steering committee is that, you know, to really give this one some teeth in this option is that, you know, the other ones do mention some sites. And we don't want this to be an oversight, because the athletic complex, the district-wide athletic complex, is really critical to your whole student vision. And so we talked about that being a critical piece to this also. And so we're going to look to, you know, maybe add some language to this that may be looking at some site there. The athletic field houses, we're actually, we dub these more like activity centers, not just athletic field houses, because a field house has kind of a connotation of one purpose, and that's not the intent. The intent is to really provide support for many avenues of athletics and other activities at your facilities. And so, but looking at this for every high school, and certainly looking at all the life cycle costs and all those condition priorities. And those you see at the top of your sheets underneath the green tab, those are, you know, looking at those numbers. And just to give you an idea of these numbers up here, if you look at that facility condition cost on that, that is all in. I mean, that's all the identified needs there. And so that's priorities 1 through 5 in there, so that's a total cost. When we get to the options, and you'll see in your options work session and the worksheets later on, in the option, that cost may be less than the total buy-in, because, like we said, we take these into 5 priorities. And part of planning and looking out at the future is to really start to look at each school and packaging in the priorities, you know, what kind of comes up and what you can afford and what are your priorities when it comes to buildings. And they're not always 1, 2, and 3. Sometimes you're going to pull out a 1 and a 5. And the reason for that is, and the best example, and Casey's told me this several times, is that, so for instance, if you have to go replace your lighting package, which could be a priority 2, well, if you've got tiles that are a priority 5, you probably don't want to put old tiles up where you just put new lights up. And so you might have to pull a priority 5 out. And so there's always working with that. And so the Jacobs group, working with Bob and his group, are going to spend a couple days the 1st of December before the community dialogues, going through every school and building a package based on those condition assessments and adequacy assessments. So that'll be a real exciting time because that really starts to put some shape on some buildings for you in that case. So on the high schools, any questions questions or comments?
Just for clarification for the group, on these big printouts that we have, the high school is on the second to the last page, I believe, is that right?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Okay, and it says junior high at the
Yeah.
top, but that's actually high schools. So that's, the second to the last page is what he's referring to, that has the totals as far as the dollars and the options listed in bold on the left. You see that? So that way you can look at the slide up there as well as the actual data.
Thank you, Dr. Ash.
And I had a question on just quickly, the athletic field houses, the actual field houses that are at the campuses now, would this athletic facility also encompass what are our existing field houses to be places for our visiting teams to go to, like at football half times, that type of thing? Would it serve that, or would those still be separate facilities on those campuses that have those stadiums?
I think the intent, and you can jump in with this, I think the intent is to provide a real activity center for the campus. That is not just focused on the football program on Friday nights. It's
Right.
really intended to be
Okay.
a whole campus concept.
Okay, so this would be more of that would be a separate district. spot, or pot then
Sure.
to talk about.
And
Okay.
certainly programming has a lot to do with that, but the thoughts are, a half football field, interior, that kind of stuff. And then, obviously athletic weight rooms and those kind of things that, aerobics, all those kind of things that can benefit the campus.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, just a quick comment on, we kind of went quickly on that first slide, but there's a lot of data points that Tracy and staff have gone over. And so just as a overall picture here, and maybe it's the other slide there, no, the
Oh,
one that
back
says
one, I'm
the
sorry.
capacity, enrollment, that, just to keep in mind as we go through this whole discussion, that we've looked at capacity, enrollment, utilization condition, adequacy, and things like that. And so really the frame, and we were challenged quite often, and the discipline that we took was to make sure that our options were actually addressing a need, and that we weren't creating options just to create options, but they're addressing a need in our district in relation to the things you see up there and those data points. So I don't want to minimize that. I want to make sure we highlight that the data is really driving a lot of these options. That's one point. And then the other point is that these are options, and this is option development, and this is the process we're in. And so we can go back now to high school, and I'll just make a little comment on that one. And so these are options that would address needs at the district level for high schools. And so when we go through those and you look at those, they're addressing a specific need, whether it's that our high schools are full and we need to reduce some of that usage during the day, and that's where a career center comes in. Where they intersect with the need and our instructional design, it's pretty optimal in terms of when a need is being met and an instructional need is also intersecting at that time. So when you have a capacity issue at high school, for example, and you're able to provide programming like at a career center that we know is a big need as well, those options become more meaningful, I think. And so that's just some comments I want to make overall.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Frost. One quick question, Dr. Frostos or Tracy. Talk through real quick, anytime there's a district-wide location, the concern always is it being used to full capacity?
Sure.
That's always a concern.
Sure.
You don't want people thinking a fine arts center is just being used on Thursday, Fridays, and Saturdays when
Absolutely.
the choirs are putting on or the orchestras are putting on events. So talk through, I think, especially, the Fine Arts Center, the district-wide athletic complex, and then a little bit, people understand the CTE, but talk through some of the ideas in either one of you. It doesn't matter.
Well, first of all, your fine arts director in this district's amazing, and he can sell this all day long. But so I will. I'm not going to do him justice, I'm sure. But the intent of this building is to really be. It's a 7 to 9 thing. It's every day. The opportunities for students to do after-school enrichment is part of what would be part of the plan here. It's not often that you can take specialized strings or violin while you're in your block schedule. And a lot of times students just trying to meet the core requirements of graduation don't have time to take these enrichment courses for the fine arts like this. But these are things like it's just not in the music, it's in the visual arts also. So there's an opportunity to do that. He's shared some ideas about like a Maymester type where students can take a intense course for 3-4 hours a day and like a Maymester type and get a credit that they wouldn't be exposed to. There's opportunities for the concert hall to be used at the elementary grade level where you can bring cohorts of students in to do their performances, and to build an auditorium big enough for what's been envisioned as half a cohort of grades, so you can bring half the 4th grade in at the beginning of the day, half the 4th grade at the end of the day, and have a 4th grade performance for the day. There's opportunities to partner in this and generate income from a state-of-the-art facility that community arts people want to use. Concerts want to use it, get an orchestra to come in or things like that. So fine arts is intended to be used 24/7. I mean, the vision for this is incredible. I think the athletic complex is the same thing. Natatoriums around here are like snow. They don't exist, and so you're in a need for this. There's a high demand for natatorium and swimming space in this district, in this city. And so you're not going to find a problem again from 5 in the morning, and God bless all you swimming parents for doing that, until 8, 9 o'clock at night. And a partnership, once again, in a thing like this is incredible, that the attraction of regional, state tournaments into a facility like this have high demand because there aren't facilities like this everywhere. On the gymnastics and wrestling side, gymnastics was an obvious one. I mean, one practice facility in the whole district right now, and wrestling is always looking for space. And so I think that those are big ones. I think that even the idea of a career and technical center, these are ideas for, partnerships with your local community colleges and tech colleges that also have needs for spaces that you're looking at adult training and, recertification courses that can occur at night. So, these facilities are high demand, high use. And I don't think you're going to have any issues, and especially in this city that has a need for it and will strive to get to these places. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And President Hogg, also that they're adaptable. So as the needs change in the future, that these facilities can adapt, such as a career center and things like that. I know Jeremy's talked about the Fine Arts Center with adaptable spaces for instruction,
Mm-hmm.
virtual learning, and things like that, so that we meet the needs as far into the future as possible.
If you have the information available, I would like you to provide us any input that the Capital Needs Committee had, or if that's maybe not this part, maybe that's coming. When they had their first look at these options, if there's anything that we should be aware of or take into consideration as well.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, and I'll share some of for instance, like on the athletic complex, the district-wide, one of the concerns from in my particular group I was working with was exactly that. If you don't identify a site, or at least give some ideas for a site, it still feels like a pipe dream. And so I think that was a critical statement, that because this is as important, and we believe that. So that will be something we're going to work on before Monday even. Thank you.
Quick question, thank you, President Hogg, on just the numbers on and I don't know if you were going to put the chart up on there or not, but so explain a little bit more on the cost. So for example, you got Bowie High School with minor renovations, but then you have a cost of $8.5 million.
Mm-hmm. If you go over one more column, there's something called an FCI there. It's a Facility Condition Index.
Mm-hmm.
A Facility Condition Index is a measurement of a renovation versus replacement cost.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Typically, what we see is the number gets higher means the worse condition the building is.
Sure.
And so when you start to, and the typical rule that is a best practice is that at 2/3, your building should be considered for replacement,
Mm-hmm.
typically. You don't have any building kind of even pushing that limit. Now, so when you see those numbers at those 20%, you start to see some minor renovations that have to occur because a building starts to age and needs some work to it. Now, we're going to take, part of the recommendations, we're going to take the term minor, moderate, major off right now and just call it renovation.
Okay.
Because I think it's unclear. For us, it's an indicator when Casey and Bob are working together, when we indicate in the planning stage here a moderate renovation, is how deep you really need to go into that condition analysis to pull out. Because some of the things that you don't see that are going to be part of how we have to develop these options is that, say for instance, you have the Career and Technical Center that pulls a program maybe out of one of your high schools. Well, there's obviously going to be some work to renovate that space to be more classroom space or just update that space. And so there are some dollars in there that have to be associated with that too. And so although those dollars don't cover it, those dollars indicate a systems renovation. And so anything that is a part of a building is a system.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we will look at the impact of decision making to see how many more dollars may need to be applied for instance, like that CTE decision.
Okay, because, my next question was going to be, okay, Seguin, you're saying 16 classroom addition, and you only have $5 million in there.
You're right.
Allocated. So
Yep.
you're saying these are not final numbers, these are just based on that FCI?
Yes,
General
sir.
numbers.
And that's exactly right. So down at the bottom, so in the next iteration of, because, after tonight, these get in the shredder and we start kind of with the new brand. And so like down here, when you see at the bottom, there's another chart that will have things like the action item and the cost of that action item, like the addition.
Okay.
And so we take, again, we use current cost of local building conditions to see what it would cost to do something like that. And so that'll be part of the option.
And still trying to understand the facility condition costs. So are you saying that if I spent roughly $5.2 million on Seguin High School, it would be brought up to what we want to see as a world-class standard? You know, that it'd be completely updated, renovated, and as kind of made new almost?
No, I actually think that part would get all your systems to where they need to be to support that.
Okay.
Is what it would be. And so when you're starting to look at, and at Seguin, it's a newer school, and so if we don't have some program elements in there, that maybe part of the addition is looking at program enhancement to make it the world-class vision. So if some weird thing, like you didn't have a band room in this high school for some odd reason, that we may consider saying, well, part of that addition has to be a band room to get it to where it needs to be in your world-class standard like that. And I think part of that also on your existing high school spaces is the same thing. When we look at, because one of the feedbacks that we're getting, for instance, on the Fine Arts Center, well, you've got auditoriums that haven't been touched in a long time. What are we going to do about existing fine art space that the kids are using every day? Yeah, we have to look at that too. And so when we get into that condition, the condition and adequacy catch some of that. For instance, if the curtains are outdated and out of their useful life, the condition caught that. But the dimmer switches or, you know, kind of things like that that kind of help support the background in there may not have been caught. And so we have to look at some of those things too to include in that. That gets you to that world class. These really tell you that these are going to give you the systems that support those buildings for that mission that you
Okay.
have.
And just briefly going back on capacity. You made a statement that when you get to, when the high schools start getting to 85, 90%, you know, they're really feeling pretty crowded. I think that begs the question then, is our capacity calculation accurate? Should we recalibrate those so that when we have 100% capacity, we're at 100%? So if 90% really is 100%, then why don't we recalibrate so that we show that 100% is 100% and 90% means we still have room to grow and so there's some capacity that's still available at those schools? I mean,
Yeah.
I just don't understand that.
Well, and I think, because I think that's an excellent question, because on paper, when you start to do a calculation across the board, is that, I mean, ideally, you're always going to have a design capacity of a building. Okay, that's kind of the stable number of how many classrooms you have, how many teaching stations you have, times the number of students that should go into that type of space. But the number that varies for you is the functional, or what we call program capacity. And that's the number you got to hit. And so, and I'm going to get to answer that question here kind of in a roundabout way, and I apologize for that. That, say for instance, you have a large cohort of special education needs that come into a building, that a class size for special education is probably 12, where the typical class size is 25. And so you may have to take a general classroom and convert it to a special ed needs room for a year. Well, that automatically reduced the capacity of that building by 13 by doing nothing more than having a new group of students walk in the door. And so, but to calculate and say that at 90% you're at 100%, then if you look at the 100%, somebody's going to say, well, why can't you go to 110%? And I think that knowing that in a planning process that we've identified the need to reduce utilization of facilities based on that number, I agree with you. You need the tool to update it every year. We've done that analysis this year. And again, how you update that program is master schedules laid onto your existing plans to see how you're using buildings. And the problem is it's a tough target to hit every year. Different educational needs that the state demands that you teach will change your program capacity overnight. And so it's a tough number to hit. And capacity is the most difficult thing to dance around. It's the toughest question to answer because of that.
Well, and it's difficult to see, you know, that in 5 years, some of our schools are going to have 80 and 79%. And what I'm hearing from you is, yeah, if you're at 88, 85, actually you're pretty good. But when, you know, I as a taxpayer see 80% utilization rate, I'm thinking, okay, there's a lot of wasted capacity there.
Yeah.
But what I hear from you is, no, actually, they're probably getting to where they're pretty good.
Well, and I think that's right. And on the converse side of that is that your principals that are sitting at 100% are figuring out a way to do just that. Now, what starts to happen, though, is that you start to compromise class size standards, you start to compromise some of those things, and you start to use buildings like they're not intended to be used. And so I agree, when you hit that 80%, that's why our benchmark for this, because again, if we go across the district, I mean, district-wide, you're at 92, 95%, and we're suggesting you build space to pull kids out.
Correct.
And so, I think that as long as the planning process stays alive with that and that functional capacity is always defined.
And I think that's
Yeah.
what we need to communicate a little bit better, that this is, when you take into consideration the programs and the function utilization of the space, and maybe that's a different calculation that we need to show that really we are at 95 or 100% capacity because of the way that the building is being utilized.
Sure.
We have a very conservative community.
Sure.
And rightly so. And I think that, we need to be aware, and we need to be able to answer those kinds of questions of why are we building more if you're under capacity by that much?
Sure.
So I think that if that is something that we consider, that's something that should be printed. In terms of functional capacity, we believe you are at whatever percent because of the types of programs that you have. And so since we're identifying on a school-by-school basis, we could do that same because of the programs that Martin High School has, or the programs at Seguin High School and the special ed, and whatever,
Right.
whatever criteria we utilize, we believe that this school is really at X% capacity. And I think that'll be more accurate and more transparent to our community as well.
Okay.
It's a good idea, Mr. Pompa. I think the actual capacity versus functional or true capacity have the two barometers, so we can look at true capacity versus
Right.
recommended capacity, and instead of showing it at 80, show it at 85%. This actually is where we're saying it's 100% of our recommendation. I think it's a good idea. So, Ms. Sullins. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Mr.
I just
Pompa.
had one very quick question, excuse me, Jamie. On the projections, and this may be for Dr. Cavazos, are we accommodating for the growth of, charter schools and private schools within our district, and that is already built into the projection that, as more charter schools get built out, fewer students may go into our district, and so is that considered in the 5-year projections for our schools?
That's really difficult to quantify, and so no, they're not built in any kind of projection. If anything, looking at, students returning from some of these schools as our program offerings continue to increase. But no, those are not factored in.
Okay.
And I don't know that it's, at this point, a way to factor it in accurately because of
Have you
of
guys
the
done that?
future.
That was not under our purview, as you have a demographer that
Okay.
takes care of that. I can help answer a question like that because we deal with that, but, and it's a quantifiable answer is not, it's not very good because, especially on the private school side, it's so hard to track private school enrollment because, well, first of all, they're not very willing to give up their data for obvious reasons. And you can look at, for instance, we have the data on your private schools and that lie within your boundaries. And there are about 6,200 of those. And it's probably a little bigger than that now, because even the last data we could get was 2010 data. And so if you're at 6,500, it's not to say that 500 aren't coming from Fort Worth, from HEB, and so even the enrollment at the schools, you can't gauge really how big the private school. And so it's very difficult to do that, unfortunately. But the general trends tell us that private school enrollment stays pretty consistent percentage-wise to your public school enrollment. And it's somewhere always between 12 and 15%, almost everywhere we go. And that's just weird, but it is. Charter, sometimes you just throw out the old book and you wonder what's going to happen, and you see the availability of charter that's out there. And sometimes, like states like Florida help you regulate that because they only grant a certain percentage at the state level for each county. So that helps, certainly. But I think charter is probably the toughest one.
Okay, thanks.
Can I make a comment and then a question, if that's okay with Jamie, related to Tony's, just to keep us on the same topic? Okay. With regard to charters, I would hope and think that as a board, we're going to be looking at creating our own charters in the district to hopefully stave off any charters coming in, so that won't be any indicator that we even have to worry about. We do have those limits in our state, but I would expect that those limits are constantly challenged every legislative session. And with our legislative makeup, there's a good chance that if we don't act and meet the needs ourselves as AISD, there's going to be a bunch coming into the area. So I think that's where Mr. Pomp is coming from. I was just curious with the capacity issue. Could you maybe give us a kind of a rundown, without too much detail, I guess, for the schools that are already, like Sam Houston, that's at 102%. So based on that discussion, that means they are just packed in like sardines right now, which the principal's sitting out there going, yeah, that's right.
I heard a big yes back there, so.
So can you kind of give us an idea of what would be happening to relieve that at SAM? I know some of it would be that there's going to be pullouts for these different things, but at the campus-specific level, is there an itemized list available, or to try to address, or that will address that capacity issue, or kind of walk us through that,
The
please.
direct answer to that is no, there's not an itemized list for that, but I think one of the things we talked about was to look at programs that would be attractive to students of these schools. But now keep in mind that the students remain students of their high schools, regardless if they go to the Fine Arts or if they go to the Career Tech Academy or anything like that. They remain homeschool in their home schools. And so I think that I should have explained that, because that can get confusing too. But I think that the strategies that help alleviate some of the utilization issues you have go beyond facilities, and they have to. And again, these aren't the easy things to do. It's the things like, offering an extended period at the end of a day and getting resources to do things like that. Because I think that most campuses and most high school campuses I hear, well, we use our campus all day long, 12 hours a day. And I would agree generally that you use fine arts, athletics, the fringe parts of your building. But I would guess that your classrooms are probably used within a confine of 8 or 9 hours a day. And so there has to be some strategies around how do we offer more time in a day. And that's not an easy thing. So that's just one solution. I'm not suggesting double schedules. I'm not doing things like that. I'm just thinking about different strategies. Obviously, the need there's a push for more virtual class learning for, even just for specific coursework. That can alleviate some of that, but that's not always easy because kids are going to take math or English or science or whatever they are, and so that's not an easy balance.
So using SAM as the example, the facility condition cost, the 29% would be $16.4 million. I guess that's what I'm curious about. Where does that, does that address capacity issue?
No.
It doesn't at all.
That's your roof, that's your chiller,
Really?
that's your electrical, that's your, so that takes care of that. And so, but you start to,
Okay.
again, you start to look at facilities like this, and you look at, and a Bowie is I'm sorry, you were like, well, Houston's a great example, that, I already have a capacity of about 3,300. How big do you want?
Right.
Even if you could put an addition on, do you really want to have a school that has a 3,800 student capacity? That's something that you have to wrestle with as a community. As many of the community members have heard, I'm not an advocate of big school, small school. I don't have that luxury because every neighborhood's different and every community's different. And so are you comfortable, if that were an option, to have a 3,800 student station high school? And I think those are the things you wrestle with, not so much the utilization, how big that currently is. But if there was an option to do that, we stayed away from that because of that size issue. Is that a fair answer for that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Ms. Pena?
Yes, I'd like to. The only reason I'm going before Jamie is because you,
Time again, it's okay. Eventually, she'll talk.
I can't wait.
well,
That'll be a good question, Ms. Sullins.
I'm sorry.
you made a statement, and I wanted some clarification on
Yes,
it.
ma'am.
You said something about homeschools. In these numbers that you count, where the programs such as cosmetology is a program at Sam Houston, and there are kids that are bused in to utilize that program, are they counted in these numbers, or they're counted in their homeschool?
They're counted in their homeschool.
So they're not double counted?
That's, yes. no, no.
Except that facility is being used for another capacity?
So imagine what that does to the capacity beyond that, and so the utilization of the facility beyond that.
Okay,
And-
that's the clarification that I was
But
looking for.
yeah, that's a great clarification. And cosmetology is the perfect instance here. It is such a great program here, is that can you centralize a program like that to relieve some of that? And would that be an option for students to do something like that? That is one great example in this, and that we've discussed.
All right, thank you very much.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you, thank you. No, I'm enjoying all of your questions, so please hop in at any time. I learn a lot from all of your questions. Your utilization numbers, do they include temporary buildings?
They do, there's two columns there, and so the utilization here does not include those temporaries.
Does not include
Yeah.
temporary buildings.
And this is always a point of discussion in a facilities plan. Is the intent to get rid of portables? Look, you're in the reality of portables in your life. There is not a district of this size that doesn't live without portables at some time. But at some point, you need to start addressing the idea of portable reduction strategies.
Right.
Because obviously permanent facilities are a better learning environment for students. And I know you all believe that too. And so I don't think the intent would be to ever get rid of every portable you have.
Right.
But I think the intent is we need to start reducing some of this. There's,
And where we can't reduce them, I'm concerned that the long-term use of portable buildings is rough on the buildings. The plumbing, the bathroom facilities, the kitchen facilities weren't designed for that type of number. So if we must have temporaries, the long-term use of them concern me.
And that's, and that is, I mean, that is such a key point here, is that, you know, I relate it to eating lunch from 9:30 to 2 o'clock. You know, there's no way to run efficiently a building like that. When you start stressing the core of that building, and it goes to that 500 students addition or whatever it is, if you start stretching the core beyond what it's meant for, then your building does become more and more dysfunctional programmatically. I can probably hear all those principals in the background going, lunch is my worst time to schedule because I'm trying to figure out how I run 3 or 4 shifts through a 45-minute time period. It's impossible.
Since it's likely that we will always continue to have temporaries as much as maybe we don't like them, are they also considered in the facility condition?
Yeah, they actually are. The condition assessment and an adequacy assessment on your portables. And we just had this discussion a couple hours ago about being sure that in a facility plan that there are dollars allotted for upkeep of portables. Because I think that gets missed. I think that in a plan that we plan with the assumption of no portables, because that's really the vision we want to see there. There has to be dollars for that. You're going to have upkeep and maintenance on portables out there, and we all know that. And so to not allocate something for that would be short-sighted in a facility plan.
And they have unique needs. Sometimes since they are outside the security grid, they're away and lockdowns and so forth. Is that also considered as you're going through this process on the unique needs of temporary buildings in terms of security or anything else?
Well, I
since they're
think
outside
that
the building?
in the security needs and the assessment, and unfortunately, I don't think it does the analytic that you're asking about, although I think critical and key to this, because there is that idea that portables do appear less safe because they sit outside a grid of what you would consider inside your realm. Lockdown, even just material is a big thing.
Weather,
Yeah, lighting, signage, just go down the list.
right.
And so, even working with districts to know that if you're going to have portables, do you include canopies in your plan to make sure that kids are protected when they walk to these
Sidewalks.
places? Yeah, you guys aren't exactly cool in August, and kids walking outside in that intense sun isn't, obviously, we want to look at that.
Okay, and thank you. I appreciate it. 2 other just, I think, quicker questions. You mentioned the, where are we in, I don't, so I understand the process
Sure.
more. You mentioned that we may need to go back and look at campuses individually for fine arts improvements, modernizations of existing facilities. Is that something that's coming once we get more details down here on this part of the chart?
So once we, because I think part of it is when you get further down and when you get to more of a recommendation stage. And so, and this is, and again, I have to go back to our meeting, just we met all afternoon with Bob and Cindy and the group, and that makes Bob panic a little bit, because it's like, so we're looking at recommendations, we're gonna look at recommendations in December and start to look at those. Well, by February, we're gonna have to go back and see, okay, what are those needs, and start to apply a cost to it. We've got the manpower to do it, and I think it's possible. But to do that before we get to kind of a honed-in recommendation may be a fruitless effort.
Okay. And finally, just a quick clarification. I think I understand. When you mentioned athletic field houses, and there would be full campus activity centers, that'd be boys sports, girls sports, football, baseball, whatever would need, the field house would have access to a new field house activity center that's more broad-based and serving the entire athlete community at the campus.
Yes, ma'am, that is our understanding when we were in the options work session. That is supposed to be an inclusive space for students.
Right. Thank you.
Just an add-on on portables. If at all possible, I, as one member of this team, would like to see if you can consider some type of portable reduction strategy. Our strategic plan is world-class. Nobody in our community associates portables with world-class, besides all the other very valid points that Ms. Sullins brought up. Is that a big monkey in the wrench? Or a big wrench in the process?
Into the whole
You know what I mean?
wrench in the process?
Yeah.
Well, I don't,
Monkey in the
I don't know
wrench.
if it is or
Wow.
not. I mean, I think that, again, depending on the recommendations that can move forward. For instance, if you make a tougher recommendation, or a tougher recommendation such as a boundary move, that can pull 400 students out and relieve capacity, and that's not an easy process. We've all been, I know Michael loves those boundary processes back there, but they're not easy processes. If tough decisions like that are made.
Michael's good at it.
I know he is. He's very good at it. But if a decision like that is made, that really does enhance our ability to do a portable reduction strategy. But if it's as simple as that we just want to try to pull a program there, a portable reduction strategy may take longer to be able to do something like that. But I think that the plan is geared toward that, because of the utilization numbers we get are really geared at permanent space.
Okay.
Another way of saying that very briefly is that the options, they do allow us to reduce temporaries. I mean, those options up there, for the most part, allow that to happen, and could be an expectation.
Okay, and I know we're early in the process. Well, I'm sure we'd all like to see those specifics when we get down into that weeds level down the
Sure.
road.
Sure.
Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Rush. How long before a temporary is considered permanent? We need to change the verbiage instead of calling them temporaries. And they're
Okay.
sure not portable, so,
Like I said, about 10 years ago in Boise, Idaho, I walked into one that
Yeah.
was 35 years old. It was older than I was.
yeah.
I'm
it's,
thinking, does that mean I'm temporary? I don't know.
They need to not be called temporaries when they're on school
That's
districts
exactly
sometimes.
right.
Let's go on to the next piece.
Yes, sir. Okay, so the junior high schools. Now, again, grouped into a single planning group. When we started the options, we paired these into more geographical regions. But what we started to discover about the junior high buildings was that, every one of them had, or most of them, have 200, 300, 400 empty seats in them. And when you're looking at specific areas, there's not really enough to warrant any sort of seat reduction. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
That's the last
The last
page,
page, yeah.
just so you know, so you can look at the
Sorry about
charts.
that, yeah. I'll keep it again.
All right,
Thank you very
thanks.
much. I appreciate that. And so, looking at the junior highs, it was difficult to plan them kind of more regionally because of that. And so what we did was we said, okay, let's kind of look at these as a group, look district-wide and see what the impact is here. And, many of these schools are old high schools that are big buildings, that have a lot of capacity in them. But when you look down and you see the permanent capacity here being, roughly, 14,800 seats. And that's a pretty conservative number there. And your enrollment, even in the 5-year projection, which shows a slight uptick, but about 9,300 students. The delta there is about 5,500 seats. Now, consider 5,500 empty seats. And that's 1.5 of your high schools. That just kind of sits empty in some way, shape, or form. that you light, you cool, you don't heat it much here, but you mow the, you do everything that you have to do as if a child was sitting in that seat. And so these are when really tough decisions start to come down the pipeline, because there is obviously a need for seat reduction at the junior high level, and that we identify. Now, in the options work session, I'm going to tell you that there was a consistent value of keeping schools open, because we realize in the school business that closing schools isn't good for business. And so we want to try and strive to make sure that we're keeping the seats open that are necessary to keep open to deliver the services and the world-class facilities you want. But at some point, those dollars start taken away from your real mission, and we realize that. And so you make a decision between a light bill or directing dollars at students sometimes. And it's not that simple. But at the junior high level, so what we started to look at was to more efficiently use these facilities. So the options that were developed for this were, the first one was to look at Hutchinson Junior High, and to make that the site for the Career and Technical Education Center. This would require a move to the Hutchinson student to the Workman campus, which doesn't have enough capacity right now to do that, so you'd have to add some capacity to the building. But it would also mean a move of the newcomer into an unidentified site yet, and then to then do that. Now, what that does is it raises the utilization level from 62% to about 69% in the district. The second option there was to close Workman Junior High, and to, again, look at locating the CTE Center at Workman, and then relocating the newcomer students, but then there'd be a redistribution here to Ferguson, Gunn, and Hutchinson of those students. And so you'd kind of figure out, again, in a boundary process, how that distribution would be. That actually raises the distribution or the utilization of your facilities to 70%. But as we continue down the discussion, and again, part of the other discussion, this is where you tie into the Fine Arts Center, but then another option arose when we started talking to the facility, or to the steering committee, and we talked to them about, is that really enough? And to look at maybe the option of a repurpose of another facility, a junior high facility. And again, the idea of repurposing is that you have a lot of uses, you have a lot of needs still in the district for facilities, whether they be professional development space, whether they be for special education programs, whether they be for enhanced high school programs. There's a lot of need that you still have. And so we're not suggesting that a building close out of an educational purpose. We're just suggesting in option C that one more junior high be looked at to close as a junior high and just repurposed for an educational use. And then once again, the life cycle and the priority cost associated with the buildings are in these options also. It's a tough one. I mean, never like to talk about closing, but I think you put it on the table for discussion.
But I think the discussion on closing is because something better is going in its place. That's the key on that discussion.
And something that's needed
Pompa?
that we've already recognized as being needs in terms of
That-
career and tech centers and fine arts centers, and so what does that get us to if we were to repurpose two?
You're closer to 80% now, which is good,
Okay.
really good.
And that's just, again,
Yeah,
capacity versus utilization capacity, right? So
Sure.
functional capacity.
sure.
And so we may have to restate those numbers in terms of what is the functional capacity for these
Sure.
buildings. Because maybe that gets us, in all reality, relatively pretty full. One of the comments that I made to Dr. Cavazos that I want to make here at this board meeting is that I want to make sure that we're careful as we look at a career tech center, if that's something that this district wants to do, or a fine arts center, that we don't limit ourselves by some of these kind of repurposing ideas. That I'd like to make sure that we look at what is the best solution or location or type of facility for this facility. And rather than try to make do with, okay, well, you know, really the best facility or the best location would be this, but since we already have this space, you know, let's make do with that. And as we're moving forward to a kind of a well, not a kind, but to a world-class type of facilities, I don't want to limit ourselves to, again, doing, just getting by with, because I think that's a lot of what we've done in the history of our public education system, and, you know, we see what we've gotten. And as we are focused on really being bold as a district and taking bold steps in what we're trying to do to redefine what our public education system is going to be here in Arlington, let's don't limit ourselves to, you know, just getting by. But what really do we need to make any one of these the most high-performing entities that they can be? So I just wanted to, I shared that with Dr. Cavazos, and I remind this board that when we started this strategic planning process, it was about being bold, about being different, and about not settling for, you know, it's good enough or it's good enough to get by with, but by really looking to see what gives us the highest level of achievement for our students. So I just wanted to make that statement as we get into this repurposing type of conversations. Okay. Thank you.
All the options that we're discussing right now are options. I can tell you in the course of already having, sitting here, I've already had assistant principals and a parent already text me saying, we're going to close something, we're going to, everything that we have right here is being evaluated. I think that it needs to be talked through. It's always concerning that until we make any votes or we have the final recommendations, that actually having names associated with these things may be a little bit premature. So I just want to caution anybody that may be watching at this point, don't be concerned that we're shutting the door of a school tomorrow. I mean, right. And if there is ever a closure of a school, the students are going to be well taken care of in the placement where they would go. We may be looking at a site for a different purpose building and such. So with that, I just wanted to interject that so we're not seemingly putting this fear factor out there that we're shutting certain locations down tomorrow.
Well, and that point can't be stressed enough. The idea of getting in the way of the educational process of a student is the last thing a facility plan should do. And so, you know, to Dr. Cavazos' credit, during the options work session, we talked about things like what's the least impact? Do you not put a 6th grade class in, and then do you graduate out your 7th and 8th grade to see which you feel little pain operationally for a year or two, but could it be the right thing to do for your students? And then to make sure, because we didn't pay attention to just that, we look at the elementary feeder patterns, because when a kid walks into their elementary school, I mean, my daughter knows she's going to be a Bradley Jaguar at Bradley High School, and she's in, you know, she knew that in 2nd grade. And so really paying attention to that, because part of the charge of this steering committee was keeping tradition, but moving forward in a world-class vision. We don't take that lightly. And so one more point on naming the schools. I think the only reason that Hutch and Workman were mentioned is because we really did have a really good use for the future of those campuses that provide a great vision for and the other reason we left the other one, just junior high, is because we don't really have identified anything.
Right, and I think that's the key.
Yes,
along with that, if anybody has really been focusing on what we've discussed in that first initial piece and then this piece, is we're talking about other brand new facilities opening up too. So you know, as a sense, we don't want individuals going back in their classes or schools tomorrow and saying, do you understand that this may potentially happen?
Yes.
When there's a long road and a lot of other possibilities that are taking place.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Can I ask? I wanted our board to know also that there's, and Tracy touched on this, there's great opportunity for collaboration on some of these things, great partnership potentials with the city, with UTA, TCC, and beyond. And we don't have dollars associated with these things yet, and that could greatly influence what the dollars will turn out to be.
Sure.
I think us being a very fiscally responsible board, it's important to know that our committee was talking about that. The community is looking at that. Our capital needs group is bringing that up as well, so that we don't operate in silos as the governing bodies of our community, that we do work together, and hence also create usage agreements for revenue generation above and beyond that as well. So I just want to commend our committee again for having that vision, and I think that's right on. But those are other specific issues that we'll have to talk about as a board.
Mr. Richter, let's move into elementary schools.
That's something easy, yeah. We have, what we did is we looked at these in 12 planning groups, even though, again, we have the 4 planning areas. But, you know, much like big districts, okay, so we're going to probably move to the first page up here, so you can go to planning area A, which will probably show, you know, so we'll start kind of at the beginning again here. Thank you. That, much like districts of this size and the geography, is that you're going to have pockets of overcrowding, you're going to have pockets that are just about right, and you're going to have pockets that don't have enough kids in them. And so this was really taken into consideration. And then, once again, a huge commitment from the steering committee and a huge commitment from the options development in this to pay attention to impact on communities when making decisions, because elementary schools are part of a community that knit a community together. And so this was a critical part of our discussion. So we see that in some areas we have some excess capacity, but ultimately elementary, and this is a key element here, as part of the world-class vision, the idea of having a science labs in elementary schools and having fine arts areas like strings rooms in elementary schools or orchestra rooms are important. Now, the sacrifice you have is on your capacity of buildings. Then to give you for instance, what we assumed was that if elementary schools did not have science rooms in there, that we would have to consider 2 classrooms for 1 science room. Therefore, and a lot of your buildings already have science rooms in there, and so we did the evaluation on there. And so when you see on every elementary sheet, and it's this right here, has this statement of what that means. And then it says impact for this group. The bottom line that you see when it says like minus up to 480 seats, that's kind of worst case scenario. That's if we happen to, and we actually are going back and doing the floor plan evaluation to make sure we didn't miss any science rooms out there. We're always double checking. That could be the impact for the area for this initiative. But it's a good initiative. And so you have to keep that in mind. You're striving for world class means we're going to have science classes in elementary schools. That sets you apart from a lot of school districts out there. And so I think that's important to note here. So the planning area A, which is Butler, Pope, Spear, Webb, and Wimbish. And I'm doing pretty good with your names so far. But we see that Wimbish is projected to exceed capacity in 5 years, and you look at the rest of the area, and do you see if there's any sort of relief that can be made? And in this one, there's some relief that can be relieving Wimbish into Spear, and that we see is really the biggest issue there is overutilization of one building. And this goes back to Dr. Cavazzo's statement where we didn't make up options just to have options. If there wasn't a lot to do, we're not going to do a lot. I mean, that's a waste of time, energy, money. And so we are looking to make sure we make our life cycle and efficiency investments into these buildings, making sure they are maintaining those standards out there. And this one, again, is paying attention to the educational track of a student. You know, not often that you just pick up students and move them out of a boundary. And that's not the way you do boundaries, I hope. We look at the progress, we look at siblings, we look at all those kind of things to make sure that it has the least impact on students in a boundary change.
You said the 5-year capacity for Wimbish is expected to increase in 5 years. Okay. But Webb and Spear have more enrollment than Wimbish.
I think it goes, with that, but I think it goes back to the capacity of the facility, that, they're much bigger facilities also. So the capacity of those buildings.
Yeah, the second, that's
Well,
2-story.
And again, in a situation like this, if you look at Wimbish, we wouldn't, obviously, because the 5-year projection shows this dramatic increase of enrollment on this one, according to the demography report.
Okay, the
This
other,
isn't a recommendation you'd make overnight. This wouldn't be a first-year recommendation. This would be when the benchmark hits this number, and so somebody should have talked about, we should mark benchmarks for indicators for movement. So if that Wimbish, when it hits a certain point, is when we should start to trigger an action for that to happen.
okay, also earlier for the high schools, you mentioned something about the FCI percentage numbers, and that if they got to a certain percentage, then that really, gives the red flags. And it shows the FCI for Webb at 43%.
Which may be your worst condition building in the entire district.
So,
You see the moderate renovations at Webb, that's what that means. So a moderate renovation, we would consider a major renovation in any sense to be kind of a gutting of a school. I mean, that'd be wall-to-wall gut. But that does have a high FCI that we indicate on here, a moderate renovation, again, for the Jacobs Group and Bob's Group to work through to see how deep you go into that.
do they at Webb really use that second floor?
That's a good question.
And I'm asking you that because I was a guest speaker at Spear Elementary, and the kids were, one of the other guest speakers was the principal of Webb Elementary, and the kids at Spear were asking the Webb Elementary principal that they had heard that the Webb was haunted, and that they never wanted to be on the second floor. And she said, we don't put anybody up there, but we did a study and it's not haunted.
Well,
So,
yeah, that didn't show up on our assessment either.
so I'm wondering, do they even use the second floor? Because I heard that statement to me implied they don't use the second floor.
Well, that's interesting. I don't know that answer right off the top of my head. But
Bob can, he says no. They don't use the
so,
second
I mean, but I can see here that, if you look at Webb, 265 empty seats. That's, that's 10 classrooms.
Yeah, but we can't count, what I'm saying is we can't count that total area if they're not utilizing it. If there's a reason they're not utilizing it, if it's really haunted.
Assuming it's not haunted, it's usable.
Yeah, it's usable. I mean, they just don't have the population to use it, it doesn't look like. And
Okay.
so I think that's.
All right, I just
probably
was
part of it.
trying to get an explanation.
No, I would like an explanation on that myself. But with that, and you see something like that, again, at 82% utilization, see, at elementary school, capacity and utilization is a simpler formula. And the reason for that is that when you look at an elementary building, the only spaces that count for capacity of a building are classrooms. We don't give capacity to art rooms. We don't give capacity to gymnasiums. We don't give to music rooms. And the reason for that is because when a student leaves their classroom, nobody fills in their classroom when they go to those exploratories. And so you can't give a double capacity. And so it's an easier calculation and a more straightforward. Now, I think that something that this district's done in the past is they've applied kind of a 90% onto that factor just for staffing and things like that. But generally, it's a pretty easy formula at the elementary grade level and less disputed. And I think that part of it is even looking at your science rooms wouldn't be considered capacity at these buildings because they're enrichment space, they're exploratory spaces. that students aren't going to, again, you're not going to replace their regular classroom with students when they go to a science room. It's an enrichment space for their current curriculum.
Excuse me, Ms. Benyet, they're mostly locker rooms upstairs and not classrooms. So they're not classroom space. That's what I understand.
Oh,
More recently, I understand. Dr. Halbrook, you have information you want to share? Come on over. Yeah, go ahead. You know.
Have some information. There are some lockers upstairs and some showers, and there are some large rooms that they were looking at in moving the orchestra upstairs. And I'm not sure where they're at in that process, but there are 2 large rooms, 1 office, showers, and lockers.
Thank you.
And it's not haunted.
and it's not haunted. We should keep stressing that it's not haunted, for all you kids out there listening tonight. I'm sorry. Okay, so we're moving on to Ellis, Larson, Rockmore, Sherrod. That you can throw anything at me when I mispronounce that one. That's the one I keep getting wrong. At any rate, okay, so this area offered challenge, no doubt about it. You have an extremely crowded school at Ellis, no secret. Even we had somebody at the steering committee, I don't remember who was talking to me about when they visited the school that day even. Just how crowded that building was. And so we do need relief here. In this option, we're looking at, it's kind of weird to see a closing of a school when an area is so crowded here. But the understanding is that there is going to be a redevelopment of the area up there by Rockmore Elementary School. And there is a large population of students that live in the apartment complex that are there, that when the apartment complex is no longer there, are going to be distributed somehow. And again, we can't control where they're going to go, how they're going to go. But that has a huge impact on almost a 50% utilization on Rockmore. And most of those students now that will stay are going to be further east, away from that building. And so considering all of the options that are out there, and again, trying to keep alive schools and making sure there's a presence where there needs to be a presence, the idea is to close a Rockmore, but not close it as a school, but really repurposing that building to be a district-wide magnet for dual language and fine arts. Very attractive programs that, again, exude world class, that are also feeder patterns into programs that you have existing in your junior highs and high schools. And so it would become, on the north side of your district, a magnet for students that have an interest in those programs. Now, but the other idea is you're going to need capacity, and again, the capacity comes around the idea of Larson and Ellis, that, and I'm still not sure I understand an explanation of a shared boundary yet for historical reasons, but it's there, and we live with the existing, and trying to figure out how we get kids, across that 360, because, that's a major boundary, no doubt about it, and our elementary schools tend to be neighborhood schools. And 6-lane highways don't tend to be conducive to elementaries and neighborhoods. So, and trying to fill up that building and relieve Ellis because there's that shared purpose. At some point, there's going to have to be a boundary here and a boundary solution. But it has to be with a new elementary school that's going to take some work between all of the buildings that you see on here. And so there's going to have to be a pretty extensive boundary process in the idea that you're going to build a 900 capacity building. Now, you do have a piece of land here in this area, so that's good. You've banked some land there. It's a challenging site for a building of 900, no doubt, but so we would have to look at that and really explore that. And but that idea is to build that new elementary school, and then you'll relieve Sherrod, Ellis, and Larson. And again, Rockmore should actually be in that statement too, because you're still impacting Rockmore kids there. And then again, into the buildings, existing building, making sure you make that investment into keeping those buildings healthy. that still exist. Good. Thank you. Area B. All right. So this, now, some things that this board had insight on many years ago or some time ago that looked at these areas that really had some needs. So the Berry, Blanton, Crow, Knox, Rankin, and Thornton. This entire area group exceeds capacity. And so in this area, classroom additions to Blanton, Knox, and Rankin, all 10 classroom additions, adding about 600 seats total in this area. The other thing is you have 500 students that kind of come across that probably in time will shift back over that are already coming across the 360 there that we don't want to happen. And so getting kids back to neighborhood schools where we're going to have some more capacity, where you've built an elementary or building an elementary school to make sure that happens. And so what we see with all these actions that are happening already and all the motions in place, there really wasn't a lot of options here. You guys made this area just a little bit easier to plan to. And again, it's part of the transition of those 500 students and how they're going to transition back and doing that the right way. And so we didn't see a whole lot of option here other than looking at making sure we take care of the buildings. All right. Area B, Anderson, Crouch, Farrell, Remency, and Roark. Once again, the idea that this is over the capacity here. Putting Farrell into this group is probably something most people wouldn't do other than, again, there's that natural boundary that kind of groups some boundaries together there. There is a new elementary school that's already coming out of fund balance that helps this, but there really does have to be some sort of boundary analysis again to balance the utilization to make sure that, and with any new elementary school, you do a boundary analysis anyway and figure out where those are going to be and where they lie. Thanks. Okay, continuing on with Area B, Amos, Bergen, Foster, Goodman, Morton. Now, this is an area that's projected to exceed capacity in the 5 years. Now, there is already plans and previous, I'm going to make sure I get this right, board action about a plan for an elementary school at the Workman site. However, no funding at this point. Thanks, I didn't want to overstep my bounds on that one. But again, looking at some boundary changes to balance some utilization. Now, the other thing that we have considered here is looking to build more, a larger elementary, but implementing more of a school within a school kind of concept, where in a 1,200, because 1,200 may help you more than 900 in the long run. But the idea would be is you would build 2 600 student station schools that shared some common areas, and making the site conducive to easy flow of traffic, good bus drop-offs. But when you share things like a physical plant, when you share things like, and you think about this, that like gymnasiums, that instead of having 2 gymnasiums, you may have a gymnasium and multi-purpose room, that instead of needing 12,000 square feet, you need 9,000 square feet. But the efficiencies of smaller schools on a bigger campus is, again, it's a concept that works in a lot of places in this, and then we have several examples that we could show you. But the idea would be to never make it feel like it's got 1,200 kids on the campus. And there could be a need to have that many seats in this area. And so to explore this idea, and something that I will have to do a good job when I get to your community, not just a good job, I'm going to have to really explain what this concept means so it doesn't scare people away. That it's really intended to make sure that you can meet your needs, but also deliver personalized instruction in a world-class facility that does that, and I think we've got plenty of examples to show that in this case. Okay.
Interesting idea. I heard you explain the other night, so I think it's something we'll enjoy hearing.
Yeah.
So the committee get to that first. Next one.
Okay. Okay, so planning area B for Adams and Atherton, Hale, and Johns. There's really no issues with capacity utilization. You just open a new school there. It's a beautiful building. And so no real issues here. We didn't start making up options, just have options. So well taken care of here. I'm sorry.
So just clarify, the numbers for Hale then don't reflect that?
Well, they don't, but we actually think that this is kind of the projection based on, because with this new school, you're going to have some unseens here. And I think we pay attention to that, but you're not sure how that's going to settle in yet. And so your cohort, which is a great projection, your demographer is amazing, how accurate they get it. But I think this is something to keep your eye on because you don't know how that's going to settle in yet. And so I'm not sure we have a pressing need yet until we see some trend in that area. But I think this is a good watchdog one for us.
Great, thank you.
Okay, now, planning area C. This is where we, again, face some challenges when it comes to utilization of facilities. And an enormous amount of discussion about how to keep elementary schools in neighborhoods and making sure that we keep educational presence here. And so you go through this and you start to look at, what do we have to do to make sure we keep education alive in neighborhoods that are underutilized and how we do that the best way. We, again, extended that idea of kind of a dual language fine arts at Corey. And it says, you're going to see on here close Corey, but I think that's kind of a harsh statement. But the idea, when you say close, it's really to close the existing purpose and repurpose it for elementary, but in a magnet concept. Now, this is something that you'll have to work through on policy and a lot of detail about access for neighborhood kids into a building like this, exploring other districts that open magnet programs like this and give priority to students who live in neighborhoods, those kind of things. You have to explore this idea of graduating out kids and how they do that, how you can do that. But the idea here is to try to balance a neighborhood school and a magnet program that can attract district-wide kids. Again, the dual language and fine arts, my statement in the options work session is that if there's one program that people will drive hours and through creeks and through woods is fine arts. When they want fine arts, they'll go find fine arts programs. And that's a very successful model. And once again, I don't have to preach Jeremy's gospel here because it really is a vision. Now, the dual language is a need, is a huge need. And so we see it as a very attractive program too. But again, this is a whole balance. And again, all those watching tonight, I don't want there to be a panic out there that tomorrow this building's, because that's not the case, not at all. What we're trying to do is keep elementary schools alive and not, because who knows what the gentrification of that neighborhood's going to be in 15 years. All of a sudden we get, all kinds of kids coming back in the neighborhood and all kinds of tricycles going down the driveways. And so you don't want to close a building that someday may have a good neighborhood use, but you want to balance the two. That's the idea and the concept behind Corey. And also offering in there a pre-K offering. That's a huge need that we see there. Early intervention that we want to get with our children. So we see this as a huge benefit of keeping schools open and offering a lot of choice for your students. And hopefully see this in a positive light.
So with those two options, one includes that pre-K for that planning area and the other doesn't. So does that option that includes that planning area pre-K, what kind of impact does that have on our existing facilities where they're going to be pulled out?
Well, I think that's kind of it. I think that there's a cost impact to a pre-K center, and I think that there is a need impact. And so, and again, I think this ties into, and it's always a balancing act, and you know that. So when you look at a Rockmore, so if Rockmore has 700 seats and a Corey has 500, is that equitable? Well, I don't know that answer, because how do you define equitable? Equitable might be that Corey needs a pre-K center in it because that's a need for its community, where Rockmore may not, or vice versa. And so I think that's an evaluation we have to do in the recommendations phase of this, to get the feedback from the community, see what their real needs are, and hear from that community to say, is it a real need? And then make our decision from there.
And if I could interject, just to be clear, that that's a consolidation of pre-K in that area and not your, what people think of a pre-K center.
Oh, yeah.
So it's simply serving more pre-K students at that location, not an entire center that's built around pre-K, if that makes sense. So just make sure on that language that we're clear, because we spent some time on that too,
Sure
that
we
it's a
did, yeah.
consolidation of pre-K in that location, and it's not a center, if you will.
Okay, and with regards to pre-K, I mean, we have a lot of movement with pre-K. We have our public-private partnerships that we're growing and
That's
hope to
correct.
grow, and if we get state funding, we'll really go to the capacity we want. When you went through the war room process and creating the initial round of options, did you look at consolidation-type issues for pre-K in the other areas of
We
the
did, and
district?
there's going to be an option here coming up that has the same kind
Okay.
of consolidation of pre-K.
Okay, thanks.
I was trying to look through here because the mention of pre-K makes me think of Cookin, which is our pre-K facility, but it's not addressed anywhere in here.
And it isn't, and I think it's something that we need to talk about. We did it, there's a condition analysis on it. The idea is that to invest back into the building. And so it's not mentioned in here. I think it does need mentioned in here that there should be actionable items on there for that building, but not to look at the program moving or damage or hurt or impeding on the program, I guess is what
Well,
I'm
because
trying to
that
say.
building needs a lot of help.
That's what we understand. So we'll make sure that we get it on here so people can see that on there.
All right, great, thank you.
I appreciate that.
Can I add a comment regarding Cookin? That campus, anything that we can do to enhance, whether it's create a program to expand building capacities, although that's a historical site, so we'd have to look at that very carefully. Anything that we can do to help that downtown area, I think, is essential. And I look at that again as collaborative opportunities. The city, UTA, they're really working hard to create something as far as an economic driver in downtown. And we're a big piece of that. We can be a big piece of that,
Well,
so.
good, they can help us find the money to do whatever we do there.
Well, quite possibly. Maybe so. So I just want us to be thinking about that when we go further down the road.
Good? Excellent, thank you. Okay, so the issue here is that, South Davis is already, kind of feeling, some pressure there, but the anticipated growth in that boundary is pretty significant. And trying to find a solution to balance utilization between Swift or Hill, and looking at a boundary process that would do something. And once again, I don't think you can mention enough to not impede the educational process of our children. Awesome. Okay, so key and short. I'm sorry, Mr. Barron.
I was just going to suggest that we remove the word close from our dictionary and go with repurpose and just leave it at that. Because when you say close, it means shut the doors. And repurpose has a more general connotation for everybody.
Okay. I'm going to make sure I note that on the right page here. Okay.
Let me
Okay,
just- Tracy, let me just
I'm sorry.
interject here. We used repurpose at Corey, for example. And I think, you may want to comment on those two words and why they were distinct, and if you want to
Well, and I
share
think
some
that
insight
I think that was part of the discussion, and I know the word close is alarming. I'm completely on board with you on that. But the idea is that there has to be a cutoff point of what the current delivery is. And that current delivery of understanding clearly that there's an action taken at there was kind of our discussion. Although harsh, that the idea that the traditional neighborhood quarry would have another use. And so we explored that a lot. We'll certainly take the guidance of your guys' expertise on this, because you have the touch of the community here too, and have to listen to them probably a lot more than I will in time here. And so I think that we take that in consideration. But that was our thought process on that, is kind of a line of demarcation to say we're really moving forward here on a bold decision.
And just to add a little bit, as Mr. Pompa mentioned, if it's repurposing a building, to be clear about that, are you renovating, gutting it or whatever, or are you going to build on that where the building used to be? Those are important, I think, clarifications as we move forward, and to be able to explain those things. And
The only thing with that is that I had heard, I got my packet, and the next day I heard in the community that we were closing Rockmore. Nothing about repurposing,
Oh, yeah.
nothing, we were gonna tear it down. That was what I heard.
Oh,
And I said, well, that's news to me.
Yeah, that old telephone game. That's exactly what happens. And I think the
So-
communication here, and that it just continues to go to that communication piece, is that continuing to talk about that, especially at the elementary grade level. We are not closing any buildings at the elementary grade level. We're
But
closing-
that's why I'm
Yes,
saying, what
yes.
Mr. Peter Barron has just stated is true and accurate in this community, because that's all I got was Rockmore was
Right.
being closed and torn down.
Yeah, yeah.
Nothing about repurposing, torn down. And all I
Sure.
could say was, that's news to me.
Oh, yeah. And and we don't want that to happen to you. I mean, that's the last thing we want to happen to you.
Right.
And so, we appreciate that input on that. That's critical for us in our language delivery.
And then while we're at it, just to clarify a previous question, so Cookin and the alternative schools and even some non-school facilities are separate. And so we'll create a sheet for all those, just to clarify that.
We're good on Key and Shore, is that correct? Okay. Excellent. Again, here in an area we don't see a whole lot of issue between capacity or utilization in this area. A little bit of underutilization, but I think we're okay. That's nothing to alarm anything. But again, we don't dismiss the idea that we've got a 21 and a 23% are out there in those areas. Okay, planning area D, Ashworth, Bebency, Beckham, Percy, and Williams. Low utilization at Ashworth. Now, thought about the idea of consolidation of a pre-K program. Again, we use the right language here, pre-K program of increasing pre-K seats at that building to help the utilization of that facility. Again, anytime you can offer a service that a part of your city needs, this is a great opportunity to do something like that. And so that's the only one we really saw that, we could really impact that utilization. Okay. Yeah. Okay. In this one, where Bryant is expected to grow, proposed. Again, this is kind of a domino one that may take some explanation on it, but again, a proposed consolidated pre-K program at Ashworth that the boundary changes to balance enrollment at Bryant, West, and Fitzgerald on this one, and so it's kind of a domino that you see here. If we were able to take some of those pre-K programs and centralize them a little more, maybe open some space at some other schools to balance some utilization then. Good? Okay. So other identified capital needs, and at this point, I think I'm turning it over to, back to Chad Bates. Okay, he's going to talk about some of the subcommittee work that's been done for other proposed things in the facility planning.
Thank you, Tracy. President Hogg, distinguished Board of Trustees, Dr. Gavassos, it's my pleasure to report to you on behalf of my co-chair, Jeff Williams, and our entire Capital Needs Steering Committee. Just to give you a brief overview, because some of you weren't here at the past briefing that we gave to you. The committee has been briefed by our consultants on several occasions. We also formed separate subcommittees, which I'm going to discuss tonight. And some of those subcommittees have met multiple times and reviewed recommendations from the administration. I will say that Jeff Williams and I did participate in the options workshop for about a half a day the last day. It was very enlightening. A lot of good work going on within the administration, so I commend you, Dr. Cavazos, and your team. So basically, where we are in the process is we're getting ready to submit some recommendations that are preliminary still to the next round of community dialogues, which will be held, I believe it's December 10th and 11th. And the first set of recommendations are going to be anything that would not be considered facilities, and that's what I'm going to go through for you tonight. There's three main areas that we actually touch on. And then, as Tracy said, next Monday night, we're going to deliberate more on the recommendations that we'll take to the next round of community dialogues as to the facilities aspect, okay? And before I go into this, I think it's important for the board to know this, and I mentioned this to our committee at the very beginning of last night's meeting. We have not considered anything in terms of debt service capacity or financial implications at this point. We are simply looking at the community dialogue input from the first round, and we're looking at the charge that's been given to the committee by the board of developing world-class standards in conjunction with our strategic plan. So we all know that after the next round of community dialogue, we get the input back from them, then we're going to take a hard look at where are we from a financial perspective. And the early results, I think it's important to note, is we have a lot of debt service that's going away in the next few years. And I'm very encouraged by that, because I think that may really assist us to really making that jump to the world-class standards. So I just want to we're going to go through some dollars today, and I don't want anybody having sticker shock because we've not considered, and being a financial guy myself, I think certainly we want to be prudent from a fiscal perspective. So this next slide, we have three subcommittees that have met: Fine Arts Subcommittee, Technology Subcommittee, and Transportation. And there's the number of meetings that we've had. And I think it's important to note that after some rather vigorous subcommittee meetings and recommendations, and then discussion at the full committee level last night, there was overwhelming support for the three different recommendations, again, to not recommend that this is the end result, but recommend that we take these to the next round of the community dialogues. In the fine arts area, I think the overview that I think is critical is there was a lot of discussion about making these programs accessible to anybody that wants to participate and removing those barriers, particularly in those areas and for those students that may have some socioeconomic challenges. And so a lot of these dollars, most of these dollars, are to level the playing field where somebody wants to participate, they have the opportunity to do so. And so band instruments obviously is the largest portion of this. There's a lot of students that can't afford to go out and rent or purchase an instrument. So, and this is also replacing some older instruments. I understand that some of them are 30 or 40 years old. The uniforms capacity for the marching band, the color guard, drill team, concert band, orchestra, choir, would provide all students participating from the junior high level on up with uniforms so that they can kind of feel like that they're part of the equation. Again, some people will not step forward and want to participate because they can't afford to purchase a uniform or something of that nature. So we're trying to address that as a committee. So the total for the fine arts is a little over 9.8 million. I think it's also important to note that theater arts is not mentioned here. It's one of the things that we talked about. Most of the theater arts budget would be falling into another category like technology or facilities because it's the lighting or it's something that's related more to a facilities approach than it is to actual instruments or uniforms. Technology, and I think this is a really key thing to mention, is when we say technology, it really encompasses much more than technology. I think one of the things that we really heard loud and clear at the first community dialogues is security for our students is paramount. And so a large portion of this technology budget is to get, I think we heard 85 to 90% coverage where we will be able to view through a central source, tying it into our police departments where they could help us if we ever have a situation arise, and have a much broader sense of coverage from a security perspective than what we have currently. The other thing that I'm excited about this from a technology perspective is virtual desktop technology becoming to the district, and that would really impact, I think, long-term significantly the operating budget of the district, because there's a lot of things like software and those kind of things, hardware replacement. This would extend the useful life of a lot of our hardware, have a centralized source for a lot of the software and that sort of thing. So it's kind of going to the state of the art, if you will, from a virtual database or desktop type perspective. But technology really includes instruction. What I say by instructions, I'm talking about, you know, state-of-the-art monitors and displays, as opposed to just having the old overhead that a lot of us grew up with in the classrooms. Again, security, I've already highlighted that. There's some technology related to transportation where you could actually be able to determine, again, this is a security aspect and a security feature, if a student gets on a bus, that they could actually go through and have a tracking device where we know that that student's got on the bus at a certain time and got off the bus at a certain time. So we, you know, if a child is missing or something, we can track some things back that way and have some great security from that perspective. Athletics, journalism, library services, special education, all are touched in this technology package. I should mention that the subcommittee, we are not going through from a committee perspective and just rubber stamping anything. There was a lot of vigorous discussion. In this particular case, the technology recommendation was reduced at the subcommittee level by about some $8 or $9 million through some efficiencies and that sort of thing, and I think it's important to note that. But the recommendation to take, again, to the next level for the community dialogue is a little over $82.6 million. Transportation, again, this is an area that I think long-term will have significant impact to the operating budget, because we are going to have more efficient, state-of-the-art vehicles, get away from some of the maintenance issues that we have on some of the existing vehicles. I think it's important for those that are not aware. I certainly was not. We will have a mixture of propane and diesel buses, and the reason for that is propane buses are not really suited for long-distance type transportation. If we have a team or a drill team or a band that's going to, you know, a UIL concert or UIL competition or a football game that's in Abilene, like Lamar High School is going to be doing, I guess, tomorrow night, that's not really something that would be acceptable from a propane perspective. So you'd have to use diesel because there's refueling efforts and that sort of thing. So I think that's important. But there was a lot of discussion about making sure that we were, you know, as green friendly as we could. The diesel buses that we're talking about are not the ones that we used to drive around and you get behind one and you get the black smoke coming out of the back of it and that sort of thing. The security for the students is really a much higher standard than what we've had in the past. So again, transportation, approaching that world-class standard that you all have so properly stated is our mission. So the total for transportation, a little over $18.2 million. And that's really the brief that I have now. Again, we have anybody that's listening, we certainly would like for you to go onto the district website and come out to the next round of community dialogue sessions, December 10th and 11th. We want your input. It's valued. The committee is certainly looking at it very, very closely, and we just appreciate the opportunity to serve and open up to any questions that you all may have as a board.
Thank you, Mr. Bates. Mr. Barron.
Thank you, President Hogg. I'm looking at the equipment, vehicles, life cycle of those things. Band instruments that last for 50 years compared to uniforms which last 5 or 8 years. Was that considered in the dollar costs here?
Yes, it was considered. There's also was a lot of discussion at the committee level about, you know, what happens if a uniform is damaged or you know, just is not returned and those kind of things. There was some discussion at the Fine Arts Committee level about what is the useful life of these type of uniforms. And I think it was also factored in that it would have a shorter life than certainly some other items, but it was estimated that it should approach the 5-year cycle that we're trying to address.
That was your guidance, was roughly 5 years?
Yes, sir.
For both that and, say, technology? Because in 5 years now, most of our technology will be way overcome by events, I think.
And there was a lot of discussion at the subcommittee level just about that point, Mr. Barron, and you know, why we may have a dollar amount that we're looking at, we're going to have to be flexible in terms of this, as technology changes. You know, a good example was, I think in the last bond election, Mr. Hibbs pointed out that there was funds earmarked for laptops for teachers, but by the time the bond package came up and was funded, that was redirected to a iPad or something of that nature. So I think the flexibility certainly has to be there to monitor those things.
I agree. It certainly has to be built in. I was just wondering at what time frame you were looking at. You were looking at a 5-year time frame, generally speaking. Okay. And some of the bonds previously had short fuses or short lifespan, right? 5 or 10 years for what we were purchasing. We didn't finance uniforms over 20 or 30 years on the last bond cycle.
Right.
Right?
And I believe...
And that's why some of the debt
5.
service is coming down. You mentioned that.
That's correct, 5 years.
Right, because they were on a 5-year cycle, and that made a whole lot of sense.
That's correct.
That's all I had. Thank you.
Real quick, Mr. Hibbs,
I was going to dovetail on what you were asking early on as far as the fine arts. Mr. Bates, one of the things that we were talking about there, they were talking about the other night was in the last bond, the instruments in the last bond actually paid for the ones that we had fallen apart that were in some cases 35, 40 years old. What they were talking about in a lot of these is the anticipated growth. If we were taking these programs from 160, where they average right now, to 300, then we're looking at substantial growth in new instruments for these new uniforms. So all this is taking in, if we're going to move to where we hope to, of having 300 individuals in each band as opposed to where we are today.
And that's the incentive for the band moving to basically to the junior highs now, is that we intend for those programs to grow. Right.
Exactly. And I just wanted to make sure that we're clarifying that in the last bond package, we did buy those new instruments, but this is for replacement of that second cycle of those uniforms, and then the growth in the overall fine arts department.
Yeah.
And I believe 10% of the student population was the target that the fine arts they were shooting for. That would be a world-class level of participation.
Good point, Mr. Hibbs. Mr. Bates and Ms. Powell may need to answer this. Ms. Powell, what is the life cycle of something for it to be considered a capital goods item? Is it 3 years, 5 years, 10 years?
Well, what we have done with technology is, well, with all of.
I'm talking more probably uniforms. Because when we did when we did band uniforms last time, it had to meet a certain year.
Right, and band uniforms, they all are on a replacement schedule, and there are different lengths in that schedule. Band is 10 years, I believe.
Right.
Drill team is like 8 years. There's more wear on those. The concert band uniforms and orchestra uniforms last much longer than the band uniforms because they get less wear and tear on them. And so they're all considered very long life items, and so that's why we put them in with the
I guess that's my
items.
question.
Yeah.
What's the minimum life cycle for it to be considered a capital?
What we have done is it's going to be, and there's not a magic line here, okay? Generally, items that have a life of over 5 years, you'll see even a few places here and there where there's stuff more along the lines of 3 years.
And I say that from my concern of a 3-year item, I don't consider a bond
I
item.
think the only place that
That's
we
where I
would
have a
see the
problem.
3-year is at the junior high uniforms, performance uniforms, and I'm not exactly sure what the life on those is. It's going to be between probably 3 and 5 years, depending on how much wear they get.
And those are things I would look at our board and say, what's that time frame for it to be considered a capital item versus things we need to build into our regular budget? I think that's where that concern comes in. And band uniforms last time, I know we had a lot of discussion, and I was shocked when I found out they were 10-year life cycles. Well, if it's going to last 10 years, that can be put in. It's going to last as long as a bus. That can be put into a bond election. which I was blown away they last that long. Football uniforms do not last that long, and they should not be put in to a bond election.
Right.
So I think the same needs to apply for any uniform that's out there. If it has, I'm shocked, drill team or whichever one you said, last 8 years, that blows me away when I hear some of those numbers. I think we have to, once it comes back from the committee, as a board, take a long, hard look of what is a capital item and what is items we need to build into our budget. Ms. Sullins.
And to your point,
Thank-
just looking at the numbers real quick.
Sorry, go ahead.
President Hogg, about $1.5 million of the 9.8 would be in that category of some level of uniform.
Right, yeah, and that's fair.
Right.
Ms. Sullins.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us this evening as well, Mr. Bates.
You're welcome.
A few quick questions. I know we're spending a lot of time on this evening. Did I hear something of a new strategy in fine arts, maybe Dr. Cavazos or Mr. Bates, on the growth aside and handling that, on band instruments, on how there would be provided to students? Is there a different strategy here that's incorporated into these numbers that's new? Or,
Having two fronts really on that. One is increased participation and increased number of instruments that are available to students for their use, considering our high percentage of economic disadvantage and the growth of the program that we expect, then we would have to have more instruments. And so
And
that's
it's-
graduated as it moves along.
outstanding, because that'll improve access to fine arts to more students. Have one other question, I think. The transportation. With the number of new specialized facilities, sometimes when I here during the day, it's difficult to move students from one building to another building because of transportation limitations. Since may have these new specialized facilities, whether it's a fine arts or career tech, is the special transportation needs maybe midday for those facilities incorporated in these numbers?
They are, and Cindy, you want to address that a little bit?
Included with the new buses that you see here, there are 12 additional regular ed buses, 6 additional special ed buses to meet some of those needs of those specialized programs. So not only are we replacing existing buses out of our inventory, we're adding to the fleet to take care of some of those special programs.
Ms. Pena. Or Mr. Hibbs?
I
Sorry, I thought
actually,
you were gone.
no,
Go
no,
ahead.
the only thing I wanted to piggyback on what you were saying, President Hogg, is I absolutely agree with you that if it's short-term, if less than 3 years, athletics, those type of things we're doing on, and we've got it built into our budget. With this one time for fine arts, a lot of those uniforms that they're talking about right there would be expanded uniforms that would be for the larger numbers. So for the one-time purchase, I would say it would make sense that would be in a bond package. If, because we're not there yet. We're talking about buying a brand-new long-term. So I would say for this initial, if we're saying this is where our programs are going to be, we need to go ahead and have those things purchased if indeed that's where we're moving to. But then for thereafter, I think that they should be built into our regular budget.
I can respect that. I still will have a hard time voting for anything that doesn't have a long enough life cycle. If we're going to expand, we can build that into our budget.
Well, and
with the groups that are
I
going.
agree, but I would take it just like building a brand-new school. When we're talking about building a new school, we're talking about having it prepared for the first day, and that's usually built in, if we're doing it through a bond package, that's built into it for the opening. For replacement purposes, wholeheartedly, I agree with you.
And we'll have more discussions, but if you go with that theory, then if we expand athletic uniforms, then we're going to put those into a bond? That's where we get into slippery slope.
No,
think there's many
we're not
discussions.
talking about adding teams. What we're talking about here is we're talking about adding to programs that we don't have presently. So I think that here again, I don't want to talk semantics, but what I am proposing is I don't want to take a hit to our operating budget right now of something that's so substantial that's going to be a one-time purchase, and then it'll be on a cycled replacement thereafter.
Luckily, we have many more times to discuss this.
And I agree, so that's why I didn't want you to cut
Ms.
me off.
Pena.
Unless things have changed drastically, I'm wondering why we are even listing choir uniforms, because my daughter was in choir from elementary through high school, and I had to pay for her uniform.
I think
So how's
The
that?
thought process was that we want to remove the barriers for participation for those students that would like to participate in the choir, and because they can't afford to go out and purchase a uniform, they don't even go forward to apply themselves.
So how many
It's
students
trying,
w-
again, the world-class component of equal access to programs for all students.
Since her choir dresses cost $90, how many students does $274,403 take care of?
Well, I think the numbers that I was hearing was the goals of participation at the fine arts level and taking the uniforms down to the junior high level for the choir specifically was what's factored into those numbers.
Well, she had a uniform in junior high. She just didn't have one in elementary, and I had to pay for it. And I'm, you know, as a taxpayer, I didn't mind paying for it, $90 for the dress, you know, customized to my daughter. That was cool. And I know there are people who can't afford it, but how many students, I'm just wondering if we're plucking a number in there unless it's changed and someone like me wasn't going to be paying for it anymore.
Well, it's not just dropping a number in. The way that was calculated was taking the healthy size choir program that you want and then multiplying that by the percent of our kids who are economically disadvantaged. And again, and then subtracting out the inventory that we have in place right now. Same thing on instruments. And so then you allow for growth over a period of time. You're not going to grow your programs to that maximum healthy amount in 1 year only. But we do recognize we're going to have growth in the programs. And we recognize we have a significantly higher number of kids who cannot afford to participate because they can't afford to buy an instrument or a uniform. And so we've tried to factor that in as well. And I don't have the exact number, what that equates to. We've got it on a spreadsheet, but it wasn't just a lump sum dollar amount that was applied. It was a mathematical formula applied to here's the number of kids we expect to be in the program times the percent of our kids who are economically disadvantaged, less any inventory we have, whether it was uniforms or instruments.
Well, I'm glad to see that because when I was growing up, I was one of those kids who needed that help. So I'm glad to see that they did it, and they did provide that kind of help for me in band, for my uniform and so on, rental fees, whatever. So I'm glad to see that. I just was curious because I knew I had to pay for all that while my daughter was going through school, and that's the first time I've seen a choir uniform as a line item. So thank you very much.
And Ms. Pop, correct me if I'm wrong, I was pretty astounded by the number. Wasn't it something like over 63% of our students are considered economically disadvantaged?
Yes.
Currently, the percent of kids who are economically disadvantaged is 68%, and our demographers have projected that number will rise to about 73% in 5 years.
And I believe the definition was a family of four with household income of $23,500. So obviously, one of the world-class objectives that you all set forth is to remove those barriers. And I think one of the things that I believe is the case, President Hogg, is part of the reason I'm here is also to get some feedback from you all. And so as we talk about deliberating bond package, operating funds, that sort of thing, certainly I'll take that message back to the committee, and we'll have some discussions about that as well.
Mr. Papa?
First of all, I was going to thank Ms. Powell for her always ready answers, and I knew that she had a formula on how those numbers were calculated, so. Yeah, Tony was ready with some more detail down there with his laptop, so again, just speaks to the quality of the staff that we have in the school district, that they are always able to back up the recommendations that they bring with good data and good formulas. And I want to make the statement that this is very much in line with our desire to engage students, because they told us when they came to visit at our strategic planning session that if they're not interested, if they're not engaged, they're not coming to school. And in order to reduce our dropout levels, or reduce our number of underperforming students, we need to engage them. We need to give them the activities and the programs that they're interested in. And while they're here, we'll also teach them math and English and everything else. But they come for the things that interest them, that engage them. And if a few $1 million can drop our dropout rates by 2 or 3%, then it's a huge return on that investment for our community. Because if we don't catch them now and educate them now and spend a little bit of money on them now, we're going to spend a lot of money later on as they get older, because they're not able to be contributing citizens in our society. So I think this is exactly in line with the things that we're talking about in our strategic plan, so I completely support that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's, you know, we all, when we're growing up, we all want to be part of a club. And this gives them a chance to be part of a club that maybe otherwise they might go be part of a gang, and we don't want that to happen.
Yeah, they're gonna join something.
That's right.
We're joining the right things. Yeah. Good point, Mr. Bates. Ms. Powell, I know you had one final statement, and then we will get the last slide and move on to the next item.
We will. We've pulled up that spreadsheet on the uniforms. The uniform calculation provides for, I think it's close to 2,000, about 1,980 uniforms. So that's the targeted participation in those programs. And then we also allow for replacing some of those uniforms over the 5-year cycle. So I think we take a target participation of 1,800, and then we grossed it up by 10% to allow for replacements that may need to take place over that 5 years. So it's 1,980 uniforms. The other thing that we were able to confirm by looking at on here, back to the question about the life of the uniforms at those junior high levels, those are still just concert uniforms, and they are projected to have a 5-year life.
Thank you. Mr. Bates, I think you're doing the last slide.
Yes, next steps, as I mentioned, this next Monday night, we have option discussions on our facility recommendations. The very presentation that you all listened to tonight, we'll be deliberating on that. And then after that, we will be making recommendations as to what we take to the community dialogues, again, December 10th and 11th. December 10th is at Lamar High School and Martin High School at 5:30 and 6:30. And December 11th is at Arlington High School and Seguin. Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure what JSHS was, so that's good. Then moving on, after the first of the year, January 9th, we'll have another Capital Needs Steering Committee meeting, another one on the 21st, and then hope to be coming back to you all with the board, as a board, with our recommendations. If we have to have additional meetings during that time to get to consensus, we will do so. As I mentioned at the very beginning, it's during this time in January that we'll really start taking a hard look at financial impact and fiscal impact and tax rate impacts and those kind of things, so that we, as a steering committee, bring a fiscal responsible recommendation to you all as a board.
Mr. Bates, on behalf of the board, you say that and all these things, and I've been to y'all's meetings. I know how long they are. Thank you and the whole committee for all your work. I also look at all of our senior staff and all of our staff that's there. The room's packed with them to answer questions and help anything that comes up. Thank them, and also to Dr. Reich, Mr. Hibbs, and Mr. Pomp, who serve on our community engagement committee. Thank you for working through that and processing that. So we knew when we started this was not a small undertaking. And they always take more than I think anyone can ever think of, and we knew what all it was going to take. So I thank you and the committee, and I thank everyone for working on this so hard.
Thank you, and happy Thanksgiving to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bates. Up next, we have report on 2013 Financial Futures Committee recommendations. Dr. C.
Thank you, President Hogg. And we want to bring forward the FFC actions that we've taken, and I want to thank our
and also
Tracy,
our consultants.
Casey,
I
yeah.
apologize. Thank you, guys.
Thank
we
you
know
all, too.
we know how much you are on my list. I say thank you when I see you. Thank you for all your work on that. Go ahead, Dr. C. Sorry.
No problem. We want to bring forward our FFC recommendations that were part of last year's FFC process and give you an update as to where we are with each one of those. because in December, we'll be talking about a new FFC group, and we want to make sure we close out the things that were recommended last year. So Cindy?
Yes, thank you. President Hogg, board members, Dr. Cavazos, we do want to visit with you this evening about the progress we're making on implementing recommendations from the Financial Futures Committee that were presented to the board back in May. The FFC made its recommendations to the board on April 18th. The board deliberated those in May and in June, and ultimately, the board approved all of the FFC recommendations except one, and that one had to do with increasing the district's contribution to employee health insurance. And the reason that the board decided not to approve that recommendation had largely to do with the uncertainty surrounding the Affordable Care Act implementation, the impact that that might have on employees and employers. The total budget impact of all of the FFC recommendations that were approved was $15.2 million. And so I'm going to go through these very quickly. We can talk about them in great detail if you'd like, but we'll go through them fairly quickly. We are making progress on all of them. Some of them are fully implemented, some of them are still in stages of being implemented, and I'm just going to take them in the order that they were presented to you all back in April. The first one has to do with granting additional opportunities or offering additional opportunities for SAT and PSAT prep classes. We've done that. We offer classes this summer and in the fall. We have found that the post-test performance on the summer with kids who took the summer course increased dramatically. We will assess the effectiveness of the fall course once we get the actual PSAT results. We don't have those yet. Our teachers who are teaching these prep classes have recommended that we actually create an electives course that kids can register to take for an electives credit. And so we're moving in that direction. We'll be offering an SAT, PSAT prep class in the fall of 2014. The next item on the list was a recommendation that we create an elementary program that would eliminate the gap between 6th grade math and 7th grade pre-AP math. We've done a couple of things here. Actually, starting last year in the 12-13 year, even before FFC, the district implemented advanced math 6th grade. So that implementation started last year. It continues this year. We've also begun implementing Avid Elementary. We're implementing that at the 9 elementary schools in the Lamar network. We have executed our Avid contract. We have teachers and staff that have been trained in Avid. We are beginning to get now the Avid library resources, and the teachers in that network in the elementary schools are beginning to implement those Avid strategies on their campuses. And as has been explained to me, we will actually not even be eligible to be Avid certified until we've completed our first full year in the program. So we will seek that Avid certification for these schools next year in the 2014-15 year. We also have, as was recommended, that we look at a K-12 IB Academy or IB Magnet program. This was an item that the board approved and authorized us to study further. And so the Elementary Services Planning Committee is doing that. They are exploring various options for both IB programs and for gifted and talented magnet programs. And the report will be presented to the board by next June. And if it depends on which route you go as far as how long implementation takes. If we were to go with an IB program, the elementary schools, or K-12 type IB Academy, then that implementation would be fall 2016, because you actually have to apply for candidacy in 1 year. So that might occur in August of 2014 would be the earliest that would occur. And then in August of 2015 is when we would expect to get notice that we could apply for an IB Academy program. And then your teachers are trained, you begin to plan your program, and you finally implement it that following fall in 2016. A GT magnet program could be implemented roughly 12 months faster. And so that's what we'd be looking at if that becomes a recommendation. Another recommendation from the committee was that we fund after-school programs to expand and strengthen course sequence and provide additional educational enrichment. We implemented elementary UIL A+ competitions. at all of our schools this year, all of our elementary schools. Those competitions actually began in spring of 2014. We've got 3,812 contest participants. And I want to point out that some kids choose to participate in more than one contest. So those are the number of competitions that kids have signed up for. And some of those may be duplicates. We may have kids that are in multiple contests. And I think it's my understanding kids will take generally as many as 3 would be the max that they would take. We expanded the UIL A+ competitions at the junior high level. Last year, in the 12-13 year, we had 9 schools that participated in UIL academic competitions. Now we have all 12 participating in UIL academic competitions. Again, there's 1,636 kids or participants, contest participants. And again, those may be duplicated counts because some kids take more than one test. There was a recommendation that we offer a world language immersion after-school program. We have created that program. At 16 of our elementary schools, there's actually one of those schools is offering 2 different languages, so we have 17 different language programs being offered at 16 schools. We're offering Chinese, French, German, Portuguese, and Spanish, and we had a maximum of 255 spots available right now, and we have 243 kids in those spots, so good participation there. There was a recommendation about gifted and talented. It was actually a lengthy recommendation about how we apply state gifted and talented funding at the elementary level. This was an item that we recommended to the board that we study further, and the board agreed with that. We have a certified gifted and talented instructional specialist on staff in that GT department now. That individual is doing a needs assessment campus by campus, and we've created some professional development that has been tailored very specifically to specific specific campus needs on differentiated instruction and project-based learning. And that professional development will be implemented beginning in the spring of 2014. There was a recommendation that we have an ambassadors club, was the way that they termed it. This was to further the information that kids are getting in the new 8th grade CTEHI course on different career paths at the high school level. And so our teachers are working on this, and they are making connections with individuals themselves, bringing speakers in to talk about various careers, and we've had close to 50 different speakers come in just this fall already and talk with kids at the high school levels about specific career paths. There were several recommendations that affected community engagement, one being that we have a State of the District campus event and that we target that around junior high schools and maybe the feeder schools that come into those junior highs. Our new community engagement director, Aaron Perales, discussed this recommendation with our community engagement committee, and the committee recommended creating a 5 to 10 minute video that highlighted things from the district's State of the District presentation that we do with the chamber, and that then the administrators in each network determined the format and the scheduling of those presentations. There was also a recommendation that we form a principals and a superintendent's advisory committee. Again, we discussed this with the Community Engagement Committee, and they recommended that we build off of the committees we already have in place in our campuses, the site-based committees, and the family engagement teams that we have. The family engagement teams are specific to Title I schools. And so the recommendation from that committee was that we build off of the resources we already have with those 2 kinds of committees and let them create subcommittees on their own campus to be the principal advisory committee, and that one person from each of those campuses could participate on a district-wide superintendent's advisory committee. And so we're looking at spring 2014 to make those selections on the campus level, and also to select the one person to participate at the district level. Another community engagement recommendation was that we enhance the outreach to non-English speaking parents. The Community Engagement Committee discussed this, and they discussed using both census data and data that we have in-house through our bilingual department and other resources we have to identify numbers of families that are non-English speaking and where those families are. We really want to work with PTAs and develop all the PTA meetings to be learning opportunities for our parents. And there also is a desire to try to partner the well-established, successful PTAs with new and emerging PTA programs at schools that maybe have not had those to date. There's also, we're developing Parent University and online training, and I believe our first Parent University event is in February, and so those are well on their way in terms of planning and implementation. There was a recommendation that made about generating revenue using a model that nonprofits use and private universities in actually creating a specialist, a position for a giving specialist to oversee generating revenue for the district. We explained that that really is a function that is more appropriate for the Education Foundation. So the committee actually amended that recommendation and just said that they actually voted that we just pass that recommendation on to the Education Foundation. So we have done that. There was a recommendation that we strengthen the collaboration with faith-based and nonprofit organizations. We have held a pastoral luncheon on October the 1st, and the focus of that luncheon was about the new CTE-HI course. And we encouraged those representatives from different churches to go back and speak with their congregations about the program and encourage people to participate in providing presentations and information to our kids in those programs. We actually had 65 people from 38 different churches attend that program, and this will be an annual event that we sponsor. We have one individual, at least on the Community Engagement Committee from the pastoral community. The next recommendation had to do with kindergarten TAs. We had eliminated 2 kindergarten TAs from every elementary campus in the 11-12 year because of state funding cuts. There was a recommendation made that we reinstate those if appropriate. We wound up coming back when Dr. Carter and Dr. Halbrick developed a formula that we used to go through each elementary school and look at their staffing, total TAs available on the campus to provide the coverage that we were looking for kindergarten teachers so that they could have a conference period and not just arbitrarily add back the 2 positions that were cut 2 years earlier. So what we wound up with was we've added 18 TAs back across the district based on that formula application. There was a recommendation that we add an intervention period back to the junior highs. We used to have a teaming concept in place at the junior highs, and again, the 11-12 year, we had to do away with that because of budget cuts, but there was a recommendation that instead of teaming, that we create an intervention period, and so we have worked through that, and we've added 36 teachers to give an intervention period to the core teachers, not to every teacher at the junior high, but to core teachers at the junior high schools, and that has been implemented this year. There was a recommendation that all employees receive a significant pay increase, and the board tackled that through several different steps. One, the board gave all employees a 3% raise. The board also increased the beginning teacher salary to $50,000 and then granted equity adjustments for teachers with anywhere from 1 to 20 years of experience to make us more competitive with our neighbors, and we've come well up the ranks in terms of how we compare to other districts in the salary schedule. There also included in that recommendation was a specific recommendation that we look at the administrator pay scales, and we are doing that through the TASB salary market study that is underway right now. We expect to present that report to the board in January. The one item, again, that the board, that the FFC brought forward that the board chose not to approve at this time had to do with raising the district's health insurance contribution. So that's the one place where you'll see an X on all these slides. There was a recommendation that we look at staffing ratios for extracurricular and co-curricular activities, and this really centered around junior high athletics as much as anything, and wanting to be sure that we had enough adult supervision for those programs rather than just staffing them all with the same number of coaches. And the point that the committee made was that this didn't have to be another teaching unit or reducing an academic class for anyone. This could be as simple as possibly paying a stipend for another staff member to be present during practice or during game times. And so we suggested to the board that we study this year, look at participation levels, look at staffing for junior high schools around us, other districts, before we bring back a recommendation. So the athletics department has the participation number. They've actually already done some survey work of districts around us, and we will be bringing forward a recommendation by April. Certainly, we expect probably earlier than that to build it into the budget process. There was a recommendation that we increase substitute teacher pay, and the board did do that. We increased the rate $2 a day, and that made us much more competitive with the districts around us. And then we have we've acquired, or in the process of acquiring, some online, an online subscription to some training modules that we will use with our substitutes. We'll make available to them beginning in January. There was a goal that recommended that we set a goal to expand pre-K enrollment by 50%. We have gained 3% new enrollment, additional enrollment in pre-K just this fall. We added 3 community-based sites. We had 14, now we have 17 community-based pre-K partners where we pay for the teacher in those facilities and they provide the TA type assistance. So we are also, as you heard in the last presentation on facilities, one of the things we're looking at is the possibility of providing some space for consolidated pre-K programs at several different areas of town to help for future growth. We also have looked at a recommendation about for NACCE accreditation for our pre-K program. Our C&I staff is working on this literally even today. We have folks at a conference yesterday and today, I believe, on this very process. We are going to actually bring together a committee in the spring of C&I folks and principals to evaluate what we think the benefits and pros and cons and ultimately benefit might be of NACCE accreditation, and we'll make a recommendation by May 2014 as to whether or not we think that that's an appropriate thing for the district to pursue. I think one question that had come up early on was, do you have to get that accreditation site by site, or can it be for a school district as a whole? And I think we have determined it could be for the district as a whole. The committee recommended that the district audit our mineral contracts, our gas royalties, and the board has recently taken action related to some underpayment of royalties, so we are proceeding there. There was a recommendation that we look at stop arm photo enforcement with a possible partnership with the city on that. We've met with the vendor who provides the red light cameras for the city, and we've met with city officials concurrently and talked about a possible partnership with the city for them to process the citations and what that might mean to us in terms of generating revenue. And so we're looking at that proposal now. We'll bring forth a recommendation on that. Superior virtual classroom learning environment was another recommendation from the committee that we pursue that. The technology department is exploring the purchase of a learning management system for both professional development and classroom instruction. Right now, we've had a focus on professional development, and moving forward, doing some things virtually for professional development. So that is an area that we are progressing in. And then they also recommended that we increase our in-house professional training and by providing more virtual opportunities, and we have done that some this year. You know, starting with convocation, we had a virtual convocation. In October, on the early release day, we focused on technology resources, and we're also implementing PD 360. So that's a quick rundown of all those recommendations, but they are all in some stage of implementation, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Ms. Powell. Mr. Hips.
Ms. Powell, as always, thank you very much for a very well laid out presentation. I want to go on your last two slides. I would like to look at the recommendation 4 and then recommendation 13. So 4, you go there first, increase substitute teacher pay. We did increase it by $2. As we're looking right now, because we're looking a little bit of hindsight at this point, is that appropriate with what we have in our neighboring districts? Are our neighboring districts in the same standard? I know that Grand Prairie, I'm told Grand Prairie and Fort Worth are both higher than we are.
They are, and this puts us right in the middle by raising that $2 a day. We weren't very far out of alignment with them,
Okay.
But the $2 a day did put us right in the middle of our neighbors.
Okay. A lot of our substitutes, I know that our number is down a little bit last year. I think for the complete year, we were up about 92, 93% fill rate on our substitutes, and right now we may be running, from one number I've been given, around 90%. So that's not extrapolated out over the year. A question that I would have for you, right now, it doesn't seem to be with salary. Would that be that may not be the limiting factor at this point? We're looking at. I know that we've got some individual that's reviewing all this, and I'm sure that's one of the things that they're looking at. Correct?
And they are, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me put that with number 13. Just thinking about that, increase in-house professional training. Our strides of doing more of our training. You know, we take our teachers out, say, 4 times a year for 3 hours on a given day. This, for me, is what I was thinking the Financial Futures group was trying to say is if we could keep those teachers in the classroom, not having to pull them out and then pay substitutes, then we could probably save a lot on substitutes. Where are we at this point of being able to get that training online where the teachers don't have to miss class time?
And we are moving in that direction. As you can see here, we've done some things already, and our goal is to actually create online learning opportunities for teachers. And Mr. Branham, can you help with that, some specifics on that? But for that very purpose, to reduce the amount of time teachers are out of the class.
Hello, good evening.
Yeah, how are you?
Yeah, that actually is a big focus for us that we started this year. We've started to do the slow transition of creating online resources for teachers. That way we can start to create the anytime, anywhere kind of approach to learning opportunities. We are early in the process, but that is kind of the shift that we've begun, you know, and really training, when you think of the training opportunities we've expanded to, paraprofessional training is an area that we have implemented this year, which I wish we had more opportunity to provide more trainings. But our approach there is to do as much in-house seat training as we can at the PDC, but also at the same time create that in an online way so they can also obtain access to those resources online as well.
Do you think the curriculum training that I'm talking about in general, where we're taking the teachers out, say, for 3 hours in the morning, or I guess there's an afternoon offering, I guess am I right in saying that we should be able to maybe do those type of offerings online, or do we need those people actually in chairs in a facility?
You know, it's hard to say. You know, everybody learns in a different way. I think it'll always be a hybrid approach. I think we'll look for ways to, where it makes sense, to provide opportunities for experts in the field to come in. I think that is valuable to have those seat time opportunities when possible. But I do see great value in a lot of the tools. So when you think of training in general, for instance, a good example is we spend hours and hours training teachers just on a tool. Right. And where we could take advantage of doing that in a virtual way. So you can do a lot of that up front. So that way your training really becomes more focused on your strategies and integration efforts. And sometimes that's going to be in person, and sometimes that can be done virtually. Right. It really depends upon what that is.
Yeah, and this will be my final comment. You know, in today's environment, at least where I come from a corporate standpoint, rarely do I go inside for training anymore. Everything is done professionally online, and I hope that we can get to that direction, because I believe that that's one of our major costs and substitutes.
Sure.
And then if we can reduce our substitute, you know, I think that would be a huge win for our principals on the campuses, not to know that they're not having to take these teachers out of the classroom in certain times.
We are in early stages. Our goal absolutely is to try to do
and I
as
didn't
much
expect you to
online.
be able to do that in 6 months either. So
there you go. But our goal is absolutely do as much online as possible, and provide a flexible environment for both ways. Because again, not everybody is going to learn in the same way. So sometimes you do need face-to-face, and sometimes virtual is great. And where it makes sense, we absolutely want to do that.
yeah, well, I'm pleased if we're going in that direction. So that's awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely. Sure.
Mr. Hibbs, I would add that what's been said is it's one way to provide professional development, but it's important that we're building this infrastructure as we move into our instructional model. It's going to require a significant amount of professional development, that we have multiple ways of delivering that. So you're absolutely right on that.
Mr. Pompa.
Thank you, President Hogg. I had a quick question for Ms. Powell. On 33, which was, I think, also your second to the last slide, you have it up there. You know, that was a bold goal of 50%. Are you beginning to get an idea of how long it'll take us to get there? Because we didn't establish a time frame. We said we want to grow it by 50%.
I think what we recognized were a couple of things. First of all, the percent of our kids who are classified as economically disadvantaged is growing, and we do have a projection for the first time this year on what that growth may be. Right now, roughly 68% of our kids are classified free or reduced. We anticipate that will grow to about 73% in the next 5 years. So there's some growth there. We also have been looking into the 3-year-old category and recognizing that if we have space, we would like to make space available for 3-year-olds. We have to provide pre-K for 4-year-olds where we have kids who are eligible for pre-K service, who qualify for it. Mm-hmm. We are not required to provide it for 3-year-olds, but where we have capacity, we're trying to fill that in. We don't want to just arbitrarily go out and add a bunch of positions just for 3-year-olds that we may or may not wind up serving. So to answer your question, I can't tell you today how long it might take us to get, you know, to 50% mark. We'd see increasing need in this area. Mm-hmm. We're trying to look for opportunities within our facilities to provide that space to allow us to grow the programs. We're also looking at our community partners. We added 3 this year. And so those are really good wins for us because it doesn't require our facility space, and Correct. That's a built-in audience, so to speak. You know, we know those kids are there when we partner with the child care center. And so we're working at it from multiple angles, but I can't tell you today how long it might take us to get 50% growth there.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Powell, thank you. And the one thing I'll say, the one item we didn't approve, the increase of contributions, I think we can see right now in healthcare it's even more confusing than what it was before. And Ms. Powell, I know the benefits committee is starting to form and look right now for recommendations for 2014. I think we've got to start looking at multiple options of what we're going to do, and that may even involve some legislative pieces where we ask the state to give us options if we need to be able to move out of TRS Active Care, because one of the problems with TRS Active Care is we have no control
Right.
over what occurs and our health care cost. And so I think we, as a board, have to look at what options we can do. You know, if it's an increase, it's some of those natures, then those things need to be done. How are we doing the increase? What's the best for the long term? And even some legislative pieces. We're not the only ones. Everyone's up in the air right now on health care of what's going on. So I think it's your benefits committee has a lot to tackle. I would tell you they may even have a hard time knowing exactly what to tackle. It's that hard this year. So I'll look for those recommendations, but we may have to also look at some temporary fixes until we can get maybe to some legislative or other pieces of some way to have the state fix that, because our teachers are not getting the benefits I think they deserve. Mr. Pomba, you have another comment?
I'm going to let Mr. Barron ask his question.
Mr. Barron.
Thank you, President Hogg. Thank you, Mr. Pompa. I had a couple of comments on the substitutes and one other thing, and that with the substitutes, do we have information on days of the week where we're short of substitutes? For example, Fridays?
We have historically seen that Fridays we have larger or a higher rate of absences.
Likewise.
And/or certain schools or areas that are short on substitutes. Can we quantify that?
We have someone now that's all they're doing is just watching and studying the substitute fill rate by school, by day, and we're in the process of gathering all of that information.
Because we very well may have to vary how much we pay our substitutes because where they teach or what days of the week in order to fill those jobs. Oh, I wasn't going to call it that. This is a kinder and gentler board. We'll call it something else. Anyway, so we're thinking about that, right?
Yes,
Okay.
we do have that.
And Mr. Barron, to add on one thing, I know Ms. Powell talked about it also, of also enabling our principals sometimes to try and reduce the amount of subs we need on Fridays through some policy changes, through approval of days off and things like that through teachers. I think that's something I know Ms. Powell looked at, and some sick bank days. I think that goes into that same thing of, you know, as Mr. Hibbs said, how do we keep them? Teachers don't like to be out for training, so then when they are out, but also how do we reduce the amount of Fridays that we need when we do have trouble getting subs in those classrooms?
Because I don't think that $2 a day does it.
Mm-hmm.
Second thing was on requiring teachers to do online training. I guess it would have to be after school hours. Who's going to go jump on that one? If we would normally take teachers out of the classroom, put them in the PDC for 3 hours, and we're not going to do that, we're going to leave them in the classroom, then they need that 3 hours or 2 hours worth of instruction to do at some other time, which is on their own time.
Well, speaking with a number of the teachers groups, they were saying that if these are type of trainings, and some of the trainings that I take that are long, that would be more than just a 45-minute jaunt, if they're able to, if it's not one that they're going to be cut out of the system as if they didn't finish it, that they can pick back up at a point, and they're able to go in for maybe a 30-minute time frame during the course of the day, before, after school, if they have a conference period, that they could get that. As long as it's not logging them out and saying they haven't done this, that they can continue. That's a easy fix, and everybody just said, we'll trade that anytime for having to go out of the classroom 3 hours and then trying to come back. One of the hardest things that we're having with these substitutes is the substitute doesn't want to come and only work for a half a day. They want that full day pay if they're going to work for the full day. So, you know, this teacher coming back, you know, after lunch, then there's not this situation that they can't, they're having trouble to find them in that spot. So that was just where the thought was coming from.
Yeah, I wasn't going there. Where I was going was, if we're going to have teachers do this online training on their own time, then we should compensate them. Wow, that landed like a rock.
You're either
It's either
paying the sub or,
compensate,
yeah.
yeah, pay the sub or pay the extra time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one or the other, but who is the final benefactor of not having the teacher leave the classroom?
The student.
The student, and so that's viable, in my opinion. Because the bottom line is, who benefits? It's the student.
Yeah.
And Mr. Barron, I think that's not the only option. I think there are options of variable days throughout, teachers online. You lose a lot of travel time.
Oh, I agree. I'm just saying that one option we should have and keep in mind is that if we're going to require teachers to do things outside the school day, we should pay them for it. That's all.
Without a doubt, but if someone watches their class for 2 hours while they're in an online training, that is something that can be done during their normal workday.
Right, but we'd be paying somebody to do that, a substitute.
A sub or a permanent sub, a sub's rotating throughout a school. There's other ways.
It's still a sub.
But you're not just paying for a half day when they're traveling. You're paying for
Well,
traveling
I
coming
agree,
in.
and that's a job that the principals, these
Right.
MPE principals can figure out to not have their people gone for half a day. Or have some people gone in the morning and some in the afternoon, so we have a whole day sub. That's doable.
Very much so. Ms. Sullins, oh, sorry, Mr. Barron, you're still.
Oh, that's it.
Ms. Sullins.
Just quickly, on substitutes, in the Financial Futures Committee recommendations, I think that you know, we covered that this evening and hearing a lot of other good ideas, and I've heard some others now, whether or not we should have substitute teacher evaluation systems, or maybe what the difference is between a long-term sub and a short-term sub, and a sub that has training, a sub that's a master teacher, or so forth like that. So maybe at another time, we could look at the substitute teaching system in more detail. So, thank you.
Perfect. Good thought, Ms. Sullins.
I did have a comment.
Okay, Mr. Pompa?
If nobody else has any questions for me. Wanted to, again, just thank the Futures Finance Committee for their hard work on this. As we can see, that is a committee that really makes an impact on this district. And one of the goals that I set a couple of years ago when I first chaired this committee was to make sure that the work that they did really made an impact on what we do for the district. And as we can see, they helped us formulate a strategy on how to spend $15 million out of the budget. Probably money that would have been spent anyway, but we're spending it in ways that our citizens are telling us it's important to be spent. And so I think that's a good point to be made, and that's also a recruiting statement
Absolutely.
for our Futures Finance Committee, because we'll get back in that process of recruiting committee members in probably December.
Very soon.
Yeah, very, very soon. And this is also one of the things that we said we would give them would be an update on what we did with their recommendations, so that my frustration when I first served on this committee was that we made a lot of recommendations that we worked really hard on, and we never knew whether they were acted on or what happened with them. And so this is us telling them, yes, we did listen to you, and yes, we are incorporating your ideas and your initiatives into this district. And finally, I would like to request that you actually, I know that you post this online, but I would like for you to send it to every committee member.
We will, absolutely. We're planning to do that. We'll post it, hopefully we'll have it online by tomorrow, and send an email message out to the folks that served last time with this attached.
Okay, great, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Pompa, for really putting some meat on this to really make sure everything's followed through. It's much appreciated. Thank you, Ms. Powell. Up next, Dr. Cavazos, who proposed 2014-15 school calendar.
Thank you, President Hogg. And at this time, we'd like to visit with the board about the process that has been underway to develop a school calendar for 2014-2015. Michael Hill has led that process, and so he's prepared to give a presentation and answer questions. Mr. Hill.
Okay, good evening to board and Dr. Cavazos. Again, as Dr. Cavazos just mentioned, we have gone through the initial part of the calendar development process for 2014-15, and I've got a few slides to talk about that process and then answer some questions if you may have some. Again, just a little background information. Each fall, a committee is developed or comes together to prepare a draft calendar for the next school year. This committee is comprised of principals, teachers, parents, students, staff, and teacher organizations. Thus far, we've had 2 meetings to discuss, and the 3rd meeting is scheduled to take input from the meeting today, and then we'll try to infuse that in the calendar if that's the desire of the board. We've made this recommendation to, the committee has made this recommendation to administration. Administration has looked at the calendar, and here we are for discussion tonight. Again, campus administration, department leadership, that's food services, transportation, payroll, all of those departments that were in there. Parents, we did have some very intelligent SLAB students that were there giving their input on that. Teacher organizations as well. Again, this year we tried an online application for parents of students within the district, and that application was posted online from October 14th through October 25th. The committee was selected October 28th through the 30th. Our first committee meeting was on November 4th. Our second committee meeting was on November 18th. We're here tonight to discuss this with you. Our 3rd meeting, if needed, will be December 2nd, and then we'll bring it back to the board for action on December 12th. A couple of things that we wanted to stress with the committee right off the bat is that, state law says we must have 180 days of instruction. We can obtain a waiver for fewer days. AISD has received a waiver in the past for 3 days that can be used for additional staff development. Teacher contracts must be for a minimum of 187 days. State law says that you cannot start school prior to the 4th Monday in August. You also must include at least 2 weather makeup days in each calendar, and we cannot include more than 6 early release days, and you have to get a waiver to get those early release days. Again, we've had committee meetings, and I'll just kind of go through some of the please considers or the items of discussion and the outcome from the committee. Teachers have a preparation day at the start of each semester, and that gained a lot of support from the committee, and that's built into the calendar. Have a balanced 6 weeks. That was a lot of support from the committee, and as best as possible, that was considered and it's reflected in the calendar. In the first semester prior to winter break, that was in an effort to be in line with TCC and potential academic partnerships with UTA. We felt that was really important to do, and so that's reflected in the calendar. On early release days, adjust the schedule such that elementary would have a truer of a half day than what they have right now, and that was supported throughout the committee. 1 full week for Thanksgiving break. That was not supported by the committee. Again, if we were to take those extra 2 days, we would lose instructional days, and we would have to place those days somewhere else in the calendar, and the committee could not find out where to put those days. Make no adjustments to the 13-14 calendar. That was supported as a starting point. And so we just, committee wanted to, hey, let's look at 13-14 as a starting point, move that forward, and then make some adjustments off of there. And so that's what we've done. The SAIL Academy, which is for teachers new to the profession of teaching, we wanted to bring them back a day earlier. New teachers report on 1 day for 3 days worth of training. We wanted to bring the teachers new to the profession in a day earlier and just give those teachers some specific PD and training. Start the school on a Wednesday instead of that Monday, and there was a lot of conversation that that week was too long for some of the kids right off, especially those primary grades kids. They're coming in the first week of school, and they've got to go 5 full days. Again, if we bump that back, then we've got to bump the semester back, and we've got to find those instructional days somewhere, so that did not have the support. The May holiday was a discussion. That did not have the support of the committee. Again, we've got to find a day to put it somewhere, and we're going to lose an instructional day somewhere there. A 4-day weekend in October instead of the September Staff Development Day. Again, that wasn't supported, but it was in lieu of another bullet point that we'll talk about here in a second. Keep Thanksgiving break as it is with the 2 days that they work the Monday, Tuesday, and the teachers are off the rest of the week. That gains support from the committee. Take the Monday after Easter off instead of Good Friday. That did not gain support from the committee. Take Veterans Day off as a day out of school. That did not gain support from the committee, again, because you lose that instructional day somewhere. And then there were some principals that felt like that was an opportunity for them to make that a part of the educational process for Veterans Day. Move the September 26th Professional Development Day to January 6th. And so what we did there, that came with high recommendations from the committee, and administration supported that one as well. And what that does is that gives you another day in that first semester where you've got another instructional day in the first semester that you gain. And teachers on the committee were really concerned that you start in August, you got a lot of things going, you're just really getting to know your kids, and now you got a day off. And they didn't see a lot of value in that break at that point. But we would like to put that in January, so you would come back with a teacher work day, followed by a professional development day, and then kids would come on that next day. And keep the makeup days at the end of the year. Again, that was supported because we didn't want to take any of the holidays that were in the calendar already and then remove those from the calendar. 6 specific elementary half-days for PLC time for the elementary teachers. Again, that was supported by the committee, but administration wants to look at potential ways to provide this time for the teachers in lieu of that at this point. Again, we want to study that a little bit more. Another recommendation was a full dedicated day for parent conferences. No students come to school, we bring parents in. 2 issues there. We lose we lose another instructional day, which was an issue. But principals were really in the mindset of, we don't want to have the mindset that Arlington ISD has one day that we want to talk with parents. And we don't, we're not having that conversation until parent conference day. We want to have that culture and that climate where we have those parent conferences and conversations throughout the year. Moving spring break to a week later, that was not supported because, again, we want to match what the local colleges and universities have with the future partnerships that are coming. And again, everybody was really, really adamant about ending the semester at winter break, and that was supported again at the second meeting. And again, I'm sorry for I think you have a copy of this with you. It's not a good copy, I apologize for that, but that's the draft calendar that we have, and so we'll entertain any questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Earl. Ms. Pena.
I want to thank you for all the hard work. I know that it takes time to do all this. It looks like a very well thought out calendar. It shows the reasons for making some of the decisions that were made. But I do have an issue I want to talk about. Okay. On the packet, which has the Board of Trustees communication that was provided to each of the trustees, which is online for the public to see, in the background that was submitted by administration, it says, and I'm just going to take a few sentences out of here, the committee shall place the needs of all students first and foremost, but shall also consider the needs of parents, the community, and the district staff. And then it goes on to say that the committee considered educational needs of our students, needs of our staff, needs of our community, and the calendars of surrounding school districts. In the last presentation that we just had, it continually talked about community input, community engagement, parent community committees, community engagement committees. Everything is in alignment with our strategic plan when we use this terminology. But in reality, when we selected the committee here for our calendar committee, we didn't do that. We had on the committee members campus administration, department leadership, parents, SLAB students, and teacher organizations. You stated that you reviewed the calendars of UTA and TCC. I do know that people in the community use this calendar to determine their calendars. So the AISD standard is utilized by churches for their religious education programs and so on. But yet, if we're going to state even in our packet that we got community input, we need to really get community input. This, to me and to other members of the community, has become bigger than anything about Assessor Chavez Day. This has become something that is not including specific community members, and so it's become a bigger issue for them than just Assessor Chavez Day. So I'm bringing up Assessor Chavez Day as an issue, but it's not really anymore. Really, the issue is, are we going to pick and choose who our community is? Are we going to allow people to have the opportunity to be in committees like this? Are online applications strictly limited to parents? And not everybody in our community is a parent of a student in AISD. This would not have allowed me to be on this committee because I don't have a child anymore in AISD. So I want to caution us that if we, as a board, as a school district, are going to limit involvement specifically, that's not taking us in the direction of our strategic plan. I hope that wasn't intentional here, because I think a lot of this board and the school district, but since the elephant in the room has come out, I just want to make sure that we understand, and I just want to caution everybody, don't be writing things like this if it's not true, because it's right in our packet that says we got community input, and we did not in the true sense of the word of our strategic plan, and in the sense of the word of what I think our strategic plan would like us to go in that direction. So that being said, I still want you to know I know that you've done a lot of work. The other thing is the advantage of having people that are community involved is that they can be educated. How many of the people knew, how many people do you think knows that we have those state laws that give us not so much of a leeway that people think we have? We don't have a lot of leeway. We have to abide by those state laws. So having community involvement is also an educational process for people to understand why we can't do some of the things they're asking for. They're logical, and they're required, so we have to do them. And like I said, I like this calendar, I like what you've done, I appreciate all the work of the people who were involved, but I don't want to eliminate anyone from having the opportunity to be on a committee, whether it be the calendar committee or any other committee. So that being said, I thank you again, but I just felt like that had to be said. Thank you.
Thank you.
Michelle, seeing no other lights, thank you so much, sir. Up next, discussion in item D, Dr. Cavazos, Leadership Development Report.
Thank you, President Hogg. And last time we talked about providing a leadership update report from our area superintendents, and we moved that up to November instead of December, much to their anticipation. So we're going to start with Dr. Wirtz giving us a leadership update, and we'll hear from the area superintendents and Michael as well about the aspiring academies. So, Stephen.
Good evening, President Hogg, board members, Dr. Cavazos. Thank you for letting us come here tonight to share with you what we've been doing with principals and campus leadership across the district. Our intent tonight is just to share with you a brief update about our activities over the course of the last semester and give you an idea of the direction that we're going to. First of all, we wanted to highlight this specific area in the strategic plan that's related to our role. Our intent this first semester is to work on the goal. It's about effective leadership, and there are three specific outcomes that we're looking for. One is to recruit and retain the most effective people by rewarding excellence and providing opportunities for their continual growth while they're here in Arlington ISD. To foster a caring culture of respect, integrity, wellness, and citizenship throughout the district, and to cultivate an environment that builds great leaders. And I think as we go through our presentation tonight, you'll see that each of those bullets have been intentionally hit on through the course of the first semester. Tonight I want to talk to you a little bit about our principal level meetings. We have opportunities to work with principals in a variety of capacities, and we meet with them on a regular basis. And one of them is the curriculum all meetings, where all principals at all levels come together. And then we also break up into level meetings, which are elementary and secondary, so we can address the specific needs that are related to that level of student. So today we want to share with you a little bit about what we've been doing in our level meetings, and these are the things that we definitely have in common in the secondary and elementary, even though they might be approached a little bit differently depending upon the needs of those different levels. In the levels meetings this year, we've been focusing primarily on systems development. That's really what we've been working on this semester. We focused on 4 areas: data management, specifically to monitor the longitudinal progress of students' mastery of content over the course of the school year. We've also worked on developing the use of professional learning communities at the campus level, using walkthroughs to drive the improvement of instruction that's taking place in the classrooms, as well as providing professional development with our principals. In the data management area, we have been allowing our principals or teaching them very specific ways to monitor students' progress longitudinally. So we're watching students' growth and mastery of content as they learn it unit by unit throughout the course of the semester. And each principal has the discretion to develop a system that is customized to meet the needs of their own campus. There are specific requirements that we are looking for with whatever system they decide to choose to develop. For example, it has to have a longitudinal view of students. It has to promote transparency. It needs to address the state accountability system by monitoring students' individual subgroups. And it also has to allow for us to have individual goals for each of the students within their content areas. So we can literally watch, for example, a student in kindergarten, what level of reading they're coming into us at, and where they're projected to go towards the course of the year. We're going to monitor them month by month. That's really the goal. Now, one of the other things that we're working with when it comes to data management is really helping to train principals and teachers on how to unpack the standards, meaning, for example, one of the texts have multiple learning strands that kids are expected to learn in each of the texts. And so we've been working on, with the curriculum department, training principals on how to unpack those standards so they can identify very specifically what is the diagnosis as to why students are not learning if they are not learning. If there are 3 or 4 items a student has to learn within one tech, it may be that there's only one specific area within the text that's actually causing the challenge. And so we're working with the curriculum department to help principals identify very specifically what is actually the cause or the root problem that's preventing the child from mastering the content, so that we can apply a prescription that's actually productive. The second item is the professional learning communities, and really what we're working on is helping teachers to begin to plan strategically with one another by utilizing data to really drive their instruction and to make adjustments to their classroom. We work on helping them to identify problems of practice, which is what I was just describing a little bit earlier, and then making decisions about how to proceed with their lesson plans so that they're scaffolded in an appropriate way so that kids are able to master content based upon where they were currently at and where we need to take them to. One of the other areas that we've been working on this year is developing campus-based assessments. We had to do this because the state has limited us to only 2 benchmarks throughout the course of the school year. And Arlington, we interpret that to be curriculum assessments based on the feedback we've received from the state. And because those only happen twice a year, it's imperative that we monitor students' progress in shorter ranges of time. And so campuses are working collaboratively to develop campus-based assessments, which are allowing teachers to really develop tests that will monitor students' progress as units are being taught, so that we're not waiting so long to find out whether students are mastering progress, and then when we find out they've been struggling, that we have to backtrack months at a time. And we are at the beginning stages of that across the district. We have some campuses that are a little bit farther along than others, but everyone's pretty much implementing a campus-based assessment, starting that process. The last 2 areas, one is specifically about walkthroughs. We have goals at both the secondary and elementary level that we've developed with the principals collaboratively regarding the frequency of walkthroughs in the classrooms, as well as the duration, how long they should be in there. Our goals include specific times where they stay a little bit longer in the classroom with the intent to give teachers very specific feedback about the actual teaching and learning process that's taking place in their classroom, and then also include shorter segments of walkthroughs. Some people might call them like flybys or just drop-ins that only last between 3 to 5 minutes, and the intent behind those walkthroughs are not necessarily to give feedback specifically to the teacher regarding the teaching process, because their time frame is so short, but more about collecting data as they're in the classroom so they can get a sense of what the overall instructional health of the building is, and so that the principal can then begin to make decisions regarding what kind of professional development is needed, where are the challenges instructionally that are taking place across the building, and which pockets of grade levels or content areas are actually experiencing those challenges so we can provide support. The last area is professional development, and one of the things that we've been implementing this semester is the Studer rounding and instructional coaching conversations. We are supporting our principals in rounding with a teacher at least once per day, and they are beginning the process of collecting their information on stoplight reports, which allow them to communicate with their staff that they're hearing their staff's needs, providing them with support, and the staff's able to visibly see that the principal has heard what they're requesting and what their actions that they're able to take towards those requests are. One of the things that we're also doing is we have purchased a book called The Skillful Leader for every principal in the district, and we are embedding that into our level meetings over the course of this school year. And the Skillful Leader comes out of Harvard University, and it's designed specifically to help us as leaders to work with teachers to combat mediocrity. What is mediocrity, and how do you overcome it as a school? And when we say mediocrity, we're not talking specifically about low-performing employees. We're talking about just the employee or the person or the teacher who's just kind of getting along, but has so much more potential if someone will interact with them in a positive way and coach them in their process. So it's called The Skillful Leader, and we've broken that book down, and we're going to include that as a book study and embed the learning into our level meetings. So that's what we're doing in our level meetings, and Dr. Hauberg's going to share with you some job-embedded site training that we're doing and the coaching that we're doing on campuses.
Sure. Dr. Rush, before you leave, quick question from Dr. Rush.
If you could go back to that slide.
Okay.
Just two quick questions. On the campus-based assessments, are those, I know you're in the beginning phases of those, are those used and graded as part of the students' coursework, or are they separate pullouts aside from the curriculum, like an end-of-week thing, or how does that work?
Well, it really just depends on how they're designing them. Okay. Some schools will wait multiple weeks at a time, like they'll wait 2 and 3 or maybe 4 weeks to give a campus-based assessment, and then other schools are doing it by unit. If a teacher chooses to do it by unit, basically what we're teaching them, and we're going to talk about this later on in the presentation, is teaching with backwards design, meaning design specifically your assessment before you start planning your lessons so you can identify what the endpoint's supposed to look like. Because one of the biggest challenges that we have really in education, this is very common, is teachers will plan their lessons, and then as they get towards the end of the unit, they will develop an assessment, they'll write their own assessment, and then give the assessment. But the challenge with that process is they're writing an assessment based upon the way they taught, not necessarily the way the standard is expecting kids to learn. And so what happens is when you get to April, for example, STAR, their outcomes end up being where kids don't do very well because they were only assessed the way their teachers taught them, not necessarily the way the state's going to ask them to show and demonstrate their learning. And so what we've been working on with principals is to really design that common-based assessment before, that campus-based assessment before they begin planning their lessons, so that they can plan and scaffold their lessons in such a way so that when the students get ready to take that assessment, they can actually do what it is that they're being asked to do on the exam. So to answer your question, if a teacher chooses to develop that assessment prior to their unit and give it at the end of their unit, they're welcome to take a grade because it's just monitoring the mastery of the content that they just taught. For schools where they wait 3 and 4 weeks to do it, I don't know they always take a grade because they already gave an assessment earlier. Now they're just assessing retention. So it's not, we don't have a consistent rule across the district that requires it. I feel personally that if a teacher creates the assessment prior to their unit and they're going to give it as their unit assessment anyways, a grade is appropriate.
Very good. And then the final question with the walkthroughs, the quick, whatever you said, flybys or something.
That's some people call me.
Do the principals have like an app or something on an iPad where they can just check for metrics and that kind of thing?
Yes, we use something here called Eduphoria. It's the same system that we record their formal appraisals on, and we have a walkthrough document. And so when they are conducting just these quick walkthroughs where they're not really giving feedback, they literally can go in there and just check off the things they see, and then they can assemble their data and say, for example, we've seen 100, let's say they go into classrooms they do 200 walkthroughs. They may say, we've seen 610 strategies observed over the course of the 200 walkthroughs, and of those 610, 10% were this, 5% were that. And it allows them to identify very specifically by grade level and content area what the gaps are as far as the instructional process that's happening.
Well, that's excellent.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like you guys have put any thought into this whatsoever. It's wonderful. I really appreciate the level of thought and detail that you guys, I am sure that this is going to demonstrate great gains and achievement and make the teachers' lives easier too as a result.
Yeah, and we want to, and it also allows us to make the professional development more meaningful because it's really impacting what their real need is, yeah. So, thank you, appreciate the feedback.
It's slide one, Dr. Reich, let's. Mr. Barron? Oh, never mind.
Good, okay.
Dr. Harbert.
Okay, good evening. On-site coaching. We're going to begin with the continuous improvement model. When we step onto campuses, what we do first is we analyze the data. We review the data with the principals or the leadership teams. It could be at different levels. We could start at the campus level. We could go down to the grade level. It could be department level. It could be teacher or student level. Also, we could be looking at campus-based assessments or the district assessments. From that point, we identify problems of practice. It could be instructional at the grade level, at the campus level. We could be looking at an instructional problem from kinder all the way through the 6th grade, which is a program. So we look at what they've identified, and then we put a plan of action into place. It could be instructional based. It could be that we need to look at our structure in guided reading. So whatever they've identified, we look at their plan, we review it, then we make sure that we have an assessment piece with that, because we want to ensure whatever instructional strategies or interventions we're putting in place, that we're assessing those, and we're ensuring that we're having student successes. So that improvement model is consistent, it's ongoing at the campus level. At the elementary level, we're also looking at lesson planning, like Dr. Wirt said, at the teacher level. But also we are assisting principals when they have a problem of practice and they have a plan, and the leadership team has, like I said, identified the plan and they want to put it in action. How do you deliver it to the staff that they will understand it, they'll accept it, and it'll move forward? So we have to really sit down and plan that and have the data there to show this is a need. So this is another way that we're planning. Other coaching is sitting down with teachers. How do you have those crucial conversations with the teachers, if it's over data, if it's over instruction? And then also we are coaching human resources. At this point, when principals are hiring their assistant principals, we may help screen the candidates. We may help create questions for the interview, and we also help with the interview process. At a time when campuses are looking at their instruction and they are doing campus-based assessments, and you get to a point where you're not seeing improvement, at this point in time, we encourage principals to call the departments, call the English department, call the math department, have them come out and let's look at what we're doing so we ensure that our instructional practices are working. We're having a lot of peer collaboration, principal to principal. We're using leverage technology platforms. For example, we've created Google Docs for the principals. We have different files in that. We have our agendas at the principal meetings, our PowerPoints for presentations they can go in, they can use at their own staff development. We also have a shared document where they can go in and place their templates so other principals can use them. At the secondary level, they have idea shares at the first class conferences, so they can dump in information so each could use. At the level meetings, we have principals making presentations. So good practices or systems that we see that they're doing, they come in the first hour of our meetings, they actually present what they're doing, and principals learn from each other. It's been great. Also, the principals have been doing a lot of collaborating on sharing their data dashboards. They've been going to other campuses and looking at their data walls. They've been sharing their protocols for the PLC structure, and also they are sharing their campus-based assessments, which is when grade levels are creating these campus-based assessments, it's a lot of work. So if they share these, it's more collaborative and also less work if we're working together. They're also sharing their RTI processes and procedures, and they're sharing their after-school staff development. So when they're teaching teachers they're sharing those processes with others so we can, those good practices, share those. We also have network liaisons at the elementary level. Each network self-appointed a liaison, and after each principal meeting, they meet with Dr. Wirtz and I, and we discuss what was helpful to you and what else do we need to improve on. And now I'll turn it over to Michelle.
Good evening. As area superintendents, we're involved in leadership development through the hiring process. In our quest to find the high-performing individuals that are going to lead our campuses, we first begin with the campus needs and the campus's perception of their needs. We focus on the following characteristics which are necessary for continuous improvement: instructional leadership, relational capacity, the ability to analyze data, and effective communication. Through the principal hiring process, we have the opportunity not only to vet out candidates, but we have the opportunity to help them understand our district's strategic plan, to understand the culture of the campus and our district, and also to convey our expectations for their leadership. Then once they're hired and in a leadership capacity on the campus, we help them with the selection of their campus leadership, the deans and the assistant principals. So we coach them in selecting those campus leaders. Again, we start with what does the campus actually need, not just, I have a friend who wants to be an assistant principal, or you know, this person's been on our campus for a long time and they already know everyone and they'd be a great fit. We look beyond that to what is it that the campus actually needs, academically, socially, in terms of diversity. We take all of those things into consideration. And so, in a sense, we broaden the imagination of the campus principal to look at all the candidates. We help them in screening and vetting the candidates. We help them in designing appropriate interview questions and tasks that are related to what the campus actually needs. We help them check references and ask the right questions, and then listen for what the respondent says and does not say in the reference checks. And we help them select the candidate that makes their campus better. We also help them select someone who has the potential and the future capacity to be a campus principal in our district. Okay. I'm having trouble. There we go. Okay. Deans of Instruction. We wanted to share with you a little bit about what we're doing with the leadership of our deans. We have 7 deans of instruction, and these are at the traditional high schools, with Sam Houston High School having 2 deans of instruction. Last year, we had 3 schools with deans of instruction, and now all of the traditional high schools have them. The deans of instruction are key members on the team for campus improvement. The deans meet monthly. They formed a professional learning community, and so there's one day every month that they meet for a day-long training and idea share. They also share informally throughout the month. But these days where they come together and they learn together are very powerful experiences. They've come to 2 of our high school level meetings, high school principal level meetings, and these are not just where they sat and listened. They actually brought ideas and shared with us, because at our high schools we have a unique problem. They're very large, as you know, and getting down to the student level in order to monitor student achievement and increase student learning is very difficult when you have a campus of 3,000 students. And so the deans have identified the students on our campuses who we call the critical mass, those students whose achievement most impact the campus. And those may be students who've experienced prior failures in courses. Maybe they have attendance issues, or perhaps they have failed an end-of-course test before. And those are students that we've got to monitor their individual progress. So maybe we're not monitoring the individual progress of 3,000 students on a weekly or monthly basis, but we are the critical mass. And the deans are helping us with that system. So this data tracking system that the deans are putting in place on their campuses is very critical to the improvement of those campuses. They've also worked with us on interventions and on campus-based assessments. We have a real concern that some of our teaching staff may or may not be able to design campus-based assessments at the level of the standard with the appropriate rigorous thinking that's needed so that the students can eventually do well on the state assessment, which, as we know, is at a very high level and in line with the state standards. And so the deans are helping their principals to work with their teachers to be able to write campus-based assessments that are going to give us the information that we need. They work together all the time, both on the day of each month where they get together, but then also informally. They call each other and email all the time. They go to each other's campuses and do observations. They share ideas, systems, processes, and they problem solve together. It's really been amazing to see how this group has come together. In terms of learning, they've been studying the book Results Coaching, The New Essential for School Leaders by Kathy Key, and then The Speed of Trust. They've gone to each other's campuses. They've studied Instructional Rounds by Elizabeth City, and they have gone to each other's campuses and observed the rounds that each campus is implementing. And coming soon in February, they're going to do 2 days of master schedule development. This is not the nuts and bolts of master schedule development. This is in terms of design, and they will be working with some representatives from the Pearson Company in February for that training. The Aspiring Principals Academy. Our structure here is we have a monthly face-to-face meeting, but then we also have online reflection activities each month using Edmodo, which is an online learning platform. It's educational social media that you may be familiar with. Then they go on and apply what they've learned in job-embedded activities. We are using the cohort model, so there are elementary, junior high, and high school current assistant principals and deans in the Aspiring Principals Academy. We currently have 18 of them, and then we are joined for some of our sessions by first-year principals. So sometimes our number swells up to almost 30. We've done 2 book studies already, The First 90 Days by Michael Watkins, and then Crucial Conversations is a training that we're going to have in January, January 30th and 31st. It's a 2-day training, and it will be open to the Aspiring Principals Academy, the deans, and then principals in our district, all 74 principals. And then I think we've already covered that last bullet. The training focus areas with the Aspiring Principals Academy are as follows. Again, we meet 1 time per month with them on Mondays from 5 to 7, but it's just the 1 time per month. The fall sessions that we've covered, the introspective evaluation of leadership style, we called this one Know Thyself, and we also did the True Colors personality inventory and learning inventory. Creating and implementing a vision, we use some resources from Transformational Leadership, which is a course that the area superintendents, chief academic officer, director of curriculum, and executive director of elementary personnel. It's a course that we take in Austin, and so we've brought back some of those ideas and materials and used those with our aspiring principals. Our last session was the principal's role in establishing and ensuring a safe and orderly environment, and we heard from Lieutenant Carol Riddle about the partnership between the police department and the district. We heard from James Smith, our security manager, on the principal's role and working with security. And then we also heard from Derek Hyinga of UEA on effective classroom management, the principal's role in ensuring that. And this session was very critical because, as I said, they're all assistant principals or deans, and they are not skilled at looking at the idea of safe and orderly environment from the principal's perspective, which is different than the assistant principal's perspective. So we had some good conversation about that. The spring sessions will be conflict resolution, the data-wise process for continuous improvement, human resource procedures and guidelines, the design and identification of quality professional development, communication skills, and customer satisfaction. Okay. Any questions about deans or Aspiring Principals Academy? Yes, sir.
Just a second. Okay, this was one that was really important to me because in terms of making sure that we have a high quality of, a high quality pool of applicants for our principals. Are we doing any type of evaluation at the end of this academy for the principals that participate or for the individuals that participate?
We have discussed that. We are still in the design stages of what type of assessment we will do with them at the end. We do, in terms of their online learning, we do go in and read and make comments and give them feedback on their online learning. But as far as what our actual end of course assessment is going to look like, we have not finalized anything in that regard.
But your thought is that there will eventually
sir.
be some kind of assessment
Yes, sir.
that we can give them, and so that we as a district have in terms of what their strengths and weaknesses are and that kind of thing.
Yes, sir. I don't know what that will look like, though. I don't know if that will be an interview, have some sort of interview component, or what exactly that's form that's going to take.
And how do aspiring principals, how are they elected to this academy?
Well, they went through a multi-level screening process. The first thing that happened was they submitted some written artifacts, including their philosophy of education, their resume. I'm trying to remember some of the other artifacts that were involved in that packet. Then they did some task in-basket activities. They analyzed some data and performed some tasks in a type of assessment where they were timed. So we looked at that information also. Based on the results of the artifacts that they submitted and the screeners that we had used, we then did some interviewing with them, the ones who were, because we had a very large pool at first.
Oh, we did? Okay,
Yes,
so we had a lot of interest, and
We had a
that was
lot
my
of
next
interest.
question.
Yes, sir. We had a lot of interest. I'm sorry, I don't remember off the top of my head the exact number, but we did have quite a bit of interest. And so we, after we looked at the screeners and the artifacts, then we did some interviewing. And after that, we sought input from their current principal, because all of them had, that was part of the criteria, is they had to have administrative experience. So we did seek input from the supervisor of the candidate. And then we finally made a decision based on all of that.
Do we foresee, Dr. Cavazos, a time where basically in order to be a principal for Arlington Independent School District, you will be required to have gone through this type of academy, or do we see something in terms of just you get additional points when you apply? What are your thoughts in terms of our future needs of principals and the utilization of this Principals Academy?
I think long-term, yes, get closer to, you have to do this to become a principal. I think on the short run and now, basically, this is certainly a plus if you're in this academy. We'll take a look here first. We've kind of made that commitment, but we've also been very clear that it's not a guarantee at this point, and we do take external applicants as well. What we want to make sure is that we're calibrating correctly, and this takes some time, as the first year is kind of your baseline, that the success of the candidates from this point on, and if they make it to be a principal, how this helped or didn't help and things like that. Yes, long-term, much more focused on, you have to have gone through this. It's early, I think, to do that right now.
Absolutely. No, I understand that. I'm just kind of looking at, because I think we've all accepted as a fact that in order to have a high-quality education, you really got to start with effective leadership, highly effective leadership, and it starts obviously with us here at the board level, with our executive administration, and then on down to the principals at the campus, and it's critical that we have highly effective principals, and I think this is something that is really leading us in that direction. I've talked to a lot of school districts in Texas, and I still haven't talked to any that have something like what we're doing in terms of ensuring that they have a ready pool of highly effective principal candidates. And so I'm glad we're doing it. I'm glad that I know it's the first year, and I'm just want to know where we're going with it in the future, so I appreciate that.
And it's also an investment in our staff and our people. And it's an investment that actually, I think, works in multiple ways, because I think the area superintendents gain a lot of insight of people who want to be principals, and it's a good process.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any others?
It's also helping other districts steal our candidates. Ms. Pena, just throwing it out there.
Well, mine's not more of a question, but a comment. I had the opportunity to go to some of the elementary schools, and in the process, as I was speaking to an elementary principal, there were two teachers standing there waiting for her and were part of the conversation, but then I was told that it was after school, bell had rung and the students were being released. Those two teachers were standing there waiting for the principal because the principal was mentoring them. So it's caused quite an excitement and enthusiasm, and the two teachers told me they didn't make it to the Principals Academy and they were aspiring to be a principal. And I said, well, you know, this was just the first class. You will have other opportunities, so don't give up. And the principal then told me that she was helping them after school, kind of taking them along what they needed to do. So that was really great to see and hear, that they were taking the time, and it was their own time, it was after school, to have that opportunity to be mentored by the principal and helped along the way. So they weren't giving up because they were very excited, and even though they stated they didn't make it the first round, they were not losing their enthusiasm and the possibility of being able to get into the academy. So I just wanted to make that statement that it's helped morale as well for them to have a hope and a possibility of being able to advance in their field. And I really like that.
Thank you, and that's a wonderful segue, because actually if they're teachers, then the Aspiring Assistant Principals Academy is the one that, the leadership development program that they would be able to be a part of, and that's Mr. Hill.
Not yet.
Hold on. Good try. I was getting looks at Mr. Barron because his light's on and we didn't call, but I was letting
sorry.
you try and transition.
Ms. Pena gave me a great segue.
I know she did. Mr.
So
Barron.
patient. Participants or applicants for the, if you go back one, the Principals Academy, are they already administrator certified?
Yes, sir.
So that was a requirement.
They actually are, they have to have at least 2 years of administrative experience.
Okay, so these are not teachers, really.
No,
These are
they are not.
administrators who want
Or
to go
deans, yes.
up. Okay. And then if you jump to the next one, then these folks, are they in the same boat?
These folks are teachers, or they may be employed as curriculum specialists or other types of employees, but I believe they do have certification. But I'm going to let Mr. Hill.
This is your transition to Mr. Hill.
All right.
Perfect.
Mr. Hill.
Mr. Hill.
Are these folks, some of these are probably already certified administrators, aren't they? And
Many
they just
of them
haven't
are.
been selected to be even an AP yet.
That's correct.
Okay.
Many of them are.
Now you're on.
Okay, all right, good. We'll get right into it. Okay. And so the Aspiring Assistant Principals Academy are current teachers within the district. There's a cohort of 25, and we did have over 80 applicants for this one. The research and the people who are working with us through this academy states that if you've got to get a sizable academy that where you can really put some emphasis on it and make sure that you get a good end product. And so we are using the blended approach of AISD staff, and you'll see some of the departments that will be there, along with Studer, who has worked with us in some other capacities, and they are doing an awesome job of doing that. Again, we will have monthly training sessions. The first one we've had was just a brief introduction, and then we dealt with some Leadership Arlington opportunities on how they can get out into the community as a part of that, again, bridging that whole gap there. The role of the assistant principal will be discussed. personal accountability, and that book that we're studying now is QBQ, the question behind the question, and that personal accountability. We will have some curriculum staff work with them on the instructional model, and what we're really seeing here is that these are teachers, and they're getting administrator training, and they can go back into the classroom and see what they're doing in the classroom, not only from the lens of the teacher, but from the lens of an administrator also. Special education department will be there. We'll do some work on board policy. We'll try to close out with the interview. Many times what we find out is that they're really good at the content, but when they get to the interview, they struggle a little bit with that interview process, and so we're going to get some staff members to come in and work with them on the actual interview, and then other topics as we may see appropriate throughout the year. So, again, we do have our meeting schedules here. We've had one already. We've got another one where Studer is coming in on December 3rd, and then you'll see we'll go all the way once per month. When Studer is here, Studer will do a 7:30 to 12 session, and then we'll bring district staff in to train them for the rest of the day early on in the process, and then later on we'll put those people out on campuses and do some internship type experiences so they can get the field experience. So, any questions about the aspiring assistant principals?
Bravo, Mr. Hill and whole staff, to our area superintendents, Mr. Hill and Dr. C. You know, let's build the leaders we need in this campus, in this district. So I think it's a great approach. So with that, seeing no more lights, thank you. Mr. Secretary, do we have any items to cover for this evening?
Well, a couple we had. Sorry. A couple. We've had requests from Mr. Pompa on the addressing the functional capacity for the buildings related to capital needs and facilities. I was requesting that we do get some more information regarding portables reduction strategy. Ms. Sullins requested a future work session on the whole issue of subs and teaching and quality and all that related information. And Mr. Pompa, which I think was already addressed, requested to send the 2013 FFC, the follow-up presentation we received tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Reich. Seeing none, we will not be going into closed session. And we've hit it right before 11 o'clock with 15 seconds to go. This meeting is adjourned.